Hey guys, tonight we begin a delightfully dull detour into the past. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. In a world buzzing with excitement, we're winding down with the most soothingly ordinary tale. A day in the life of a 19th century lamplighter. You'll meet a gentle soul whose salary depends on wax and wicks, whose biggest adventure is wrestling chimney soot. It's so calmly uneventful that it's practically hypnotic. If you enjoy drifting off to these peaceful narrations, please like and subscribe, only if it feels right for you, and share your location and local time in the comments. Let's see our global bedtime map grow as we settle in together. Now find your comfiest spot. Dim the lights to a soft glow, turn on a gentle fan hum and prepare to relax. Feel the day's tension slip away as we approach the quiet streets of Victorian evenings. Soon we'll step onto cobbled lanes lit by flickering lamps, each flick and crackle guiding your eyelids heavier. But before that, take a moment to breathe, ease into this warm, playful drift, and anticipate the tranquil journey ahead. Now the story begins. Close your eyes, take a deep breath and focus on the tale. Soon you will drift into restful slumber. The screen now fades to darkness. Before the first hint of daylight, the lamplighter stirred. In the half-light of his small attic room, the coarse straw mattress pressed cold against his back as he sat up slowly, limbs heavy with early morning quiet. The single-shuttered window was dark. Beyond its wooden boards the world remained buried beneath the velvet hush of night. He paused a moment to listen, only the faint rustle of an owl's wings drifting past, and the distant murmur of a cockerel's pre-dawn crow, still too faint to rise above the hush of the sleeping village. He drew a slow breath and swung his legs over the side of the bed. His feet found the rough-hewn floorboards, splintered here and there from years of use, and he flexed his toes against the chill wood. Nearby, a tin basin held yesterday's wash water, now settled cool and still. He reached for the basin, tilted his head, and splashed the icy liquid onto his face. Cold droplets clung to his lashes and beard, drawing out a soft grunt of surprise. But the shock banished the last vestiges of sleep. He was awake. In the low amber glow of a single tallow candle set on a narrow shelf overhead, the lamplighter collected his garments. He tugged on a thin linen shift, the fabric worn supple by countless sunrises and dusks. He then slipped his arms into a coarse woolen coat, once dark green but faded to a muted olive by years of wind and rain. He pulled it close around his chest, feeling the reassuring weight of the heavy cloth. Next came stout leather breeches, laced at the calves, and well-worn boots whose soles bore the imprints of every cobbled street he would tread today. He buckled each strap carefully, mindful of the small stones sometimes caught in the crevices. A pair of sturdy woolen gloves lay folded on a nearby stool. He tugged them onto his hands, fingertips roughened by friction and faintly stained with soot. The candle flickered low as he crossed the narrow room toward a battered wooden table. Upon it lay the tools of his trade, the brass nozzle of a gas lamp, several spare wick holders, and a cluster of small oil canisters. He lifted the nozzle first, weighing its solid brass body in his palm. The metal was cool and gleaming where he had buffed it only the night before, but closer inspection revealed fine scratches and dark smudges around the base. He winked at it in gentle reproach before setting it into a small copper pan filled with pale lamp oil. With a slender cloth, he worked the oil into the crevices, easing away any lingering soot. Each slow, methodical stroke left the surface brighter, its curves gleaming in the candlelight. He turned next to a row of wick holders. They stood upright in a shallow tray, metal arms poised as though in salute. He lifted the first and examined the tiny coil of wick wound around its spindle. Faint gray fuzz clung to the edges, a telltale sign of charred residue. Gently, he loosened the holder's collar and slid the wick free, trimming away any frayed ends with a pair of fine scissors. He replaced the wick, adjusted its height by turning the small knurled knob, and tested its tension with a careful tug. Satisfied that it would draw fuel evenly once alight, he moved on to the next. Each wick received equal attention, for an uneven flame could dim the streets and leave a lonely traveler stumbling in darkness. Beside the wicks sat several oil canisters, small glass flasks sealed with cork stoppers and labeled in his neat, looping hand. Kerosene, refined, red one; gas lamp oil, pure, another. He tapped each with a careful finger, listening for the faint slosh of liquid within. One canister was nearly spent. He set it aside to be refilled at the reservoir later in the day. Then he placed his palm on the largest flask, the one filled with his principal working oil. He lifted it thoughtfully, checking the clarity of the liquid against the lamp's glow. It was free from cloudiness, its golden hue clear and limpid. Good fuel would ensure a bright flame, steady and true. With his tools readied, he slipped them into a leather satchel, the same humble bag he'd carried for seasons. The strap creaked as he drew it over his shoulder, the leather supple yet firm from long use. In the deepest pocket lay something precious, a faded route map. Unfolding it, he spread the fragile parchment on the table. Fine ink lines traced the twisting lanes of the village, connecting lamp post to post in a delicate web. He traced his finger along the path: Main Street, the stone bridge by the river, the narrow alley behind the baker's shop, then onward to the outskirts where the last lamps awaited. Tiny numbers marked each post, recording the order of his ignitions and the times he'd recorded yesterday. He studied the map under the candle's wavering light, committing its turns and landmarks to memory. Though he had traversed these streets for years, slight alterations, newly installed posts or a temporary obstruction, required fresh scrutiny. Satisfied that nothing had changed, he refolded the map carefully along its original creases and slid it back into the satchel's inner compartment. He took a moment to straighten the bag's flap, aligning its brass buckle with the leather strap. The satchel felt heavier now, alive with the promise of the day's work and the faint tang of oil from its seams. In the stillness, the lamplighter paused. The candle's flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the paneled walls. He raised a gloved hand to his lips and breathed out a quiet whistle, a long soft note that echoed thinly in the silent room. The melody was simple, a tune he'd learned in childhood, and it felt like a gentle benediction on the slumbering village. Beyond the shuttered window, rooftops and chimneys lay silhouetted against a sky as dark as treacle. No sound disturbed the calm, neither the creak of a cart wheel nor the bark of a dog. Only the whisper of his own breath and the distant hoot of an owl. Gathering his satchel and gripping his tools, he moved to the door. With a measured click, he lifted the latch and pushed it open. A draft of cold air swept into the small chamber, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke from a neighbor's hearth. He closed the door behind him, locking it with a small key that jingled softly in his palm. The corridor outside was in perfect darkness, broken only by the dim glow of a single lamp still burning at the far end of the hallway, one he must tend later after he'd finished his circuit. Stepping lightly, he made his way down the narrow stairs that led from his quarters to the back entrance of the lamp shop. Each step creaked under his weight as though protesting the early hour. At the bottom, he paused beneath an iron hook where his ladder was hung. The rungs of polished wood gleamed faintly even in the gloom. He unhooked it, leaned it carefully against the door jamb and took up his satchel once more. Then with one last glance back at the dark doorway he slipped outside. The village lay hushed, head to tail of slumber. Above, the sky remained starless, swept clean of moonlight by thick clouds. Yet in that oppressive darkness, the lamplighter felt a rare sort of freedom. The freedom of an empty street awaiting his ministrations, of lamp posts waiting to breathe light into the world. He set off down the cobbles, boots muffled by the thin layer of dew, whistling again his soft, gentle tune. The night embraced him with open arms and he, steady, purposeful and calm, began his day's work. A faint sliver of mist clings to the cobblestones as the lamplighter pushes open the heavy door of his lamp shop. The air is cool against his face, carrying the earthy scent of damp stone and the faintest trace of oil that lingered inside the workshop overnight. He pauses for a moment, hands still resting on the iron latch, listening to the hush that blankets the sleepy village. In that stillness, he feels the weight of the hour, that liminal space between night and morning when all the world holds its breath. Drawing in a slow breath, he swings the door fully open and steps onto the narrow threshold. His boots make no more than a gentle scuff on the worn flagstones, but even that soft sound seems to startle the village out of its deeper slumber. Ahead of him, the wooden shutters of the shop stand closed like guardian wings. He reaches out and, with deliberate care, unlatches the iron fastenings. One by one, the shutters begin to creak on their old hinges, releasing the lingering warmth of the workshop into the cool dawn air. Each plank bears the faint grooves of countless nights, layers of soot and oil stains that map the lamplighter's steady routine. He pulls back the shutters, first on the left, then the right, until the street-side windows stand exposed to the faint gray light. The glass panes are smudged with residue from last night's smoke, but he does not pause to clean them now. Instead, he slides them aside, announcing his presence to the sleeping lane, and watches as a small breath of wind stirs the loose papers scattered on a nearby table. Behind him, the soft interior glow of an oil lamp fades gradually, swallowed by the early morning mist. Once the shutters are secured against the outer walls, he turns his gaze to the departing glow of the single lamp that still burns in the distance. Its flame shimmers like a lone star battling the approaching dawn. He reflects, as he always does, on how precious this faint light seems in the pale hush before sunrise. It is a comfort to know that somewhere, another street corner, another post, still holds vigil against darkness. Before him stretch the cobbled lanes, slick with dew that beads on each stone as if the earth itself were breathing. He lifts a hand to his collar, tucking his worn coat more snugly against the morning chill. His breath puffs in little clouds, dissolving instantly into the air. The sound of his footsteps is muted. The damp stones absorb each tread, leaving no echo behind. The village is a maze of narrow passages and low-lying roofs, all blending into the same muted silhouette. Only the occasional glimmer of iron railings or a glint on the carved doorframe betrays the individuality of each building. Passing beneath the first archway, he notices a slender tendril of smoke rising faintly from a chimney, the only sign that a hearth has been lit somewhere within. The lamplighter pauses for a heartbeat, imagining the family who will soon gather by that fire, perhaps stirring porridge or drawing water to boil. He wonders whether the dawn light will catch the swirl of steam, casting a golden haze over their breakfast. Then, as though out of respect for their domestic peace, he silently moves on, leaving their world wrapped in warmth and privacy. He knows each doorstep here, every threshold where a knock might summon a groggy homeowner or where a stray plank might creak underfoot. The village has grown familiar beneath his soles, each patch of uneven stone etched into his memory. At this hour there is no bustle, no clatter of carts or clip-clop of hooves. Instead, the only sounds are the faint rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze and the soft murmur of an early brook at the far end of the lane. Occasionally, a loose shutter somewhere is coaxed open from within, a small creak that echoes like a whispered greeting. The lamplighter's route map, folded into neat rectangles in his leather satchel, has guided him this far. But at this hour he relies more on habit than on parchment. His steps are measured, almost ritualistic, tracing the network of streets he has known for seasons. With each carefully placed footfall, he senses the rhythm of the town waking, though as yet its pulse remains faint. As he crosses the small square, the single lamp at its center stands like a lighthouse in the gloaming. Its flame flickers, momentarily dancing in the slight breeze, as though anxious to burn brighter at the first hint of day. He pauses beneath that solitary lamp post, raising his gaze to the slim brass nozzle that crowns it. He never fails to admire the workmanship, the gentle curve of the post, the polished metalwork. His fingertips brush against the cool surface, feeling the small imperfections that come from hours spent tending flame. Yet the lamp holds firm, ready to be extinguished or left as a point of safety until the night fully relinquishes its hold. Night's remnants cling to shadowed doorways as he moves onward. Here and there, the faint glow of an ember in a hearth leaks through cracked shutters, painting narrow beams across the cold stone. He steps aside from these warming shafts of light, careful not to disturb the sleeper within. One door stands wide ajar, its latch broken, and beyond it, the dim shape of a straw mattress is visible. A stray cluck from a nearby henhouse sounds like a startled bird, wings beating against the wooden slats. Even that small disturbance fades quickly into the deep quiet. He listens for the first crow of a rooster, a herald that will soon signal the arrival of villagers and merchants, bread bakers and blacksmiths, all stirring into daily life. But the dawn remains patient. Only the soft, persistent drip of water from a rooftop gutter marks the passage of time. Behind him, the lamp shop stands silent, its new shutters sealing in the day's forthcoming workbench clutter. Ahead, the final stretch of his early morning journey guides him toward the broad thoroughfare where the first gas lamp must be kindled. With every measured step, the village awakens imperceptibly around him. A gentle glow seeps into the sky, pale as a misted pearl, revealing the outline of distant hills. The lamplighter, moving with quiet certainty, carries in his satchel the implements of his trade, a ladder of oak rungs, a small brush for soot, fresh wicks trimmed to perfection. Yet at this moment he carries only his own breath and the soft echo of his footsteps, bridging the world of darkness behind him and the promise of dawn ahead. As he rounds the corner onto Main Street, the hush is almost complete. Even the surface of the river that flows beside the road appears stilled, reflecting the pale light with a mirror's clarity. He pauses to admire that moment, that liminal instant when shadow and light stand balanced. Then, in near silence, he lifts one foot and plants it firmly on the next stone, continuing his journey. Dawn's silent footsteps are his alone, an unhurried preamble to the carefully ordered rituals that will fill the hours before sun and lamp are exchanged once more. And so, with measured pace and quiet purpose, He steps forward into the growing light, prepared to greet another day's meticulous work. The small workshop lay hushed under the pale glow of a single tallow candle, its flame trembling in gentle protest against the lingering drafts that slipped through the gaps in the wooden shutters. The lamplighter stood for a moment in the threshold, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. Around him, rows of shelves held brass burners, glass globes, lengths of copper pipe, and battered oil cans, each bearing the soft patina of many seasons' use. A simple wooden table, scarred and darkened by years of soot and spilled lamp oil, occupied the center of the room. He stepped forward and settled himself on a low stool, his heavy boots sighing softly on the rough plank floor. In that quiet corner of the workshop, before the first lamp had been lit for the day, he began the careful ritual of inspecting his tools by candlelight. At the edge of the table lay a mound of soot-encrusted burner assemblies, their brass surfaces dulled by years of exposure to flame and smoke. He picked up the first piece, an ornate gas burner no more than 2 inches across, resting it gently in the palm of his calloused hand. The warmth from the candle danced across the metal, revealing swirls of black residue lodged in every crevice. He unfolded a coarse linen cloth, its fibers worn soft by countless washings, and began to wipe away the accumulated grime. With each stroke, a little more of the brass gleamed through, a fine curl of soot lifted into the air and drifted toward the wavering light. He worked methodically, mindful not to scratch the metal's smooth finish, coaxing the burner slowly back to a faint luster. Next to the burners, a neat row of wicks awaited his attention. Each wick, cut from heavy cotton cord, had served its turn in the confines of gas lamps, drawing up fuel and holding flame for hours on end. He lifted the first and held it close to the candle, testing its height against the dancing flame. With a small pair of silver-edged shears, he trimmed away the charred, brittle tip, revealing fresh strands of fiber beneath. The cut was precise and clean. No fiber was left frayed enough to threaten uneven burning. After trimming, he laid the wick carefully on a wooden board, aligned in perfect parallel with its companions. He repeated the procedure for each wick, breathing in the faint, sweet scent of singed cotton mingled with the candle's faint smokiness. On a second work surface, a trio of small glass vials stood ready for refilling. The lamplighter uncorked the first, a slender cylinder of green-tinted glass, and inhaled the cool, pungent aroma of turpentine. With slow deliberation, he poured a measured quantity from a larger stoneware jug, the liquid sloshing softly as it found its place within the vial. He replaced the cork stopper, rubbed it with a bit of wax to ensure a snug seal, and returned the vial to its carved recess in an oak block. The second vial held naphtha, its petroleum scent lighter and almost sweet by comparison. He topped it up in much the same fashion, wiping any spills with a scrap of linen. The final container was reserved for spare kerosene, now nearly full from the day before. He checked its level through the glass walls, nodding to himself with quiet satisfaction. A small leather pouch lay open at the edge of the table, its surface coppery and worn. Inside he stowed spare parts, extra wicks, additional nozzles in various sizes, small screws and joints, a short length of solder, and a few bits of emery cloth for smoothing pipe joints in the field. Each item had its own pocket, marked with faded chalk letters, W for wick holders, N for nozzles, P for pipe fittings. He closed the pouch slowly, ensuring that nothing jostled free, and set it aside for the morning. A second, larger satchel waited on the floor. There he placed the brass oil canister, a globe wrench, and a stout brass key for opening gas valves. He fastened the leather straps methodically, each click of the buckle echoing in the stillness. With the primary tasks completed, he lifted the candle into a small iron bracket affixed to the wall. The flicker cast long shadows across the room, the outlines of tools, the grain of the wooden beams, the map of the village pinned above his desk. He paused to rub his hands together, feeling the residual grit of soot beneath his fingernails. For a moment, he breathed deeply, savoring the quiet moment before the day's work began. The hush of the village outside, the faint scent of oil and turpentine in the air, and the steady heartbeat of the candle flame. From his desk drawer, he retrieved a folded parchment map of the lamplighting route, its edges smudged and corners soft with wear. Under the candle's glow, the streets were rendered in sepia lines, the symbols for each lamp post neatly inked in the margin. He traced the route with a fingertip, beginning at Main Street's first post and curving eastward past the stone bridge. The map was as familiar to him as the back of his weathered hand, yet he reviewed it each morning to guard against any unexpected additions or missing posts. Today, he noted, one new lamp had been installed near the old baker's alley. He marked it with a small cross, then folded the map back into its parcel. Throughout the inspection, the candle's flicker served as both guide and companion. Its flame glowed golden, enveloping the workshop in a soft luminosity that felt intimate and protective. The lamplighter's movements were slow and deliberate, each breath measured, each action considered. He found in this quiet ritual a calm center, a deliberate antidote to the hurried pace that would come with his rounds. These moments of preparation steadied his hands and sharpened his senses. Finally, he wiped the last smear of oil from his fingertips and stepped back from the table. The tools stood orderly, burners wiped clean and ready, wicks trimmed to uniform length, vials filled and sealed, spare parts safely stowed away. He surveyed his handiwork by the remaining glow of the candle, feeling the familiar satisfaction of readiness. In the next hour he would climb ladders, adjust valves, and listen to the hiss of gas as each lamp blossomed into flame. But for now, in this calm cocoon of shadow and light, he allowed himself a moment to appreciate the simple eloquence of his craft. He extinguished the candle with a practiced pinch, 3 tiny sparks, then silence. The workshop fell into deeper quiet, the faint outline of each tool lingering in his mind's eye. Gathering his leather satchels, he stood, adjusted the collar of his coat, and moved toward the shuttered door. Outside, the first pale glow of dawn had not yet crept over the horizon. He stepped out into the cool pre-dawn air, the memory of meticulous inspection tucked safely in his thoughts. With every tool in order and every wick prepared, he was ready to kindle the day's first light, an unspoken promise of warmth and safety for the village that slept on. A pale ribbon of light crept above the horizon as our lamplighter emerged from the workshop, ladder slung over one shoulder, leather satchel resting against his side. The dawn held its breath, neither quite night nor fully day, and in that gentle half-light the world seemed hushed, expectant. He paused for a moment at the threshold, inhaling the cool air, crisp with the scent of damp earth and lingering ember from last night's hearth fires. In the quiet, he could still hear the dying hiss of the workshop candle that had guided his careful tool inspection, an echo of warmth before the coming chill of early morning. The ladder, fashioned of sturdy oak and marked with faint notches at each rung from seasons of use, felt reassuringly familiar in his hands. He set it down beside the first lamp post on Main Street, its wrought iron curves silhouetted against paling sky. A few stars still lingered, twinkling like distant lanterns in the firmament, but soon even they would surrender to the encroaching light. This initial lamp, the inaugural beacon of his daily ritual, bore witness to countless sunrises, serving merchants, watchmen, and wanderers alike as the village slowly stirred awake. He leaned the ladder carefully, pressing the spiked feet into the cobbles to ensure it would not slip. With a practiced motion, he steadied it against the lampost's broad base and began to climb. Each rung creaked softly under his weight, a sound he had come to know as intimately as his own heartbeat. Halfway up, he paused to glance back along the empty street. Shuttered windows, doorways still dark, the pungent tang of algae from last night's mist rising between the stones. Soon, a baker would strike his oven embers, and the first crow of a rooster would echo from a distant yard. But for now, the world remained tranquil, awaiting the promise of illumination. Reaching the lantern housing, he placed a gloved hand on the cool glass panels. Tiny flecks of soot glimmered faintly, remnants of yesterday's flame. Carefully, he unlatched the brass clasps, their edges smoothed by years of opening and closing. The door swung inward, revealing the empty cavity where the trimmed wick would soon sit. He withdrew the small bundle of tools from his satchel, the wick holder, trimmed wick already tested for length, and the slender spanner to adjust the valve. Each instrument lay nestled in precisely its own leather pocket, labeled in his neat hand. He handled them with reverence, mindful that a misstep here could darken the street when light mattered most. Gently he placed the cleaned and trimmed wick into its holder. The fresh cut glowed pale at its tip, a tiny promise of flame to come. He eased the wick assembly into its socket, ensuring it sat perfectly centered beneath the aperture of the gas jet. With skill honed over many mornings, he tightened the holder until it was secure. The slightest wobble could skew the flame's shape, and he would not allow such an imperfection to mar the lamp's gentle pulse. Next, he retrieved the small brass key from his coat pocket and fitted it onto the gas valve. The metal was cold against his fingers. He turned it one notch, then another. A soft, steady hiss followed, like a breath drawn deep and held. He listened, attuned to its pitch and rhythm. Too forceful, and the flame would roar and sputter. Too weak, and the glow would falter. Satisfied that the stream of gas was just right, he withdrew the key and shook off his glove, revealing a single match clutched between his fingertips. He lit it from a rough box of striking paper, the tip flaring instantly as the sulfur ignited. There was a brief flare of yellow, then a lean, wavering flame. Holding it at arm's length, he guided it carefully to the gas jet's orifice. The match head trembled, blackening, then caught the escaping gas. At first, the flame flickered uncertainly, like the first heartbeat of a newborn. He sheltered it with his other hand, a barrier against any stray breeze drifting through the street. Slowly the glow steadied, blooming into a soft, unwavering light. The glass panels glowed from within, casting a warm, honeyed pool onto the damp cobbles below. He let the match burn a moment longer, to ensure the flame had anchored itself to the wick. Then, with a decisive flick, he brushed it against the metal edge and let it fall onto the stone, the brief flare of its descent the only small interruption in the stillness. The lamplighter exhaled, a puff of breath that mingled with the remaining mist. Below, the narrow shaft of light reached toward his feet, illuminating the carved vine motif on the post and the small rivets that held the panels in place. Before climbing down, he withdrew his pocket ledger and an iron nib quill. The paper was thin, yellowed at the edges, but each page bore the clear record of his daily rounds. In the margin beside the lamp's number, MITH-01, he wrote the time, 4:32 a.m. His script was careful and deliberate, each curl of the letters turned with the patience of someone accustomed to long hours of solitude. This entry marked not just the first light of today but also the beginning of his personal chronicle, a testament to consistency against the shifting seasons. He replaced the ledger and quill into their leather sheath, then gave the lamp one last inspection. The flame stood smooth and upright, its gentle glow unwavering in the morning air. Satisfied, he shouldered his ladder once more. As he descended, the hush of the street seemed to deepen, grateful for companionship. Reaching the ground, he paused to watch the lamp from a slight distance. Already, it cast a circle of light bridging the gap between sleeping homes and the yet-to-awaken marketplace. The distant clatter of shutters drawn by early rising innsmen mingled with the scratch of his boots on the stones. Each breath he took carried the scent of oil and the faint perfume of dew-laden grass from a nearby patch where night-blooming flowers still clung to their petals. He adjusted the ladder across his shoulder and began his walk to the next post, mindful of the rhythm in his stride. The first lamp's glow receded behind him, but its warmth lingered in his memory, a steady promise that darkness would yield to light. Dawn's edges sharpened in the sky, revealing pale creams and rose-tinted clouds, as though the heavens themselves congratulated his handiwork. In his satchel, the map lay folded, lines of ink tracing his path through the village. 16 more lamps awaited him before day would fully claim Main Street. Yet this first flame would endure until the sun chased it from the sky, a silent companion to merchants unlocking their shops and to children catching their first glimpse of morning. As he moved on, the lamplighter felt a quiet satisfaction settle in his chest. He was, in that moment, both the usher of day and the guardian of night's retreat, a keeper of small miracles in the gentle, mutable hour between darkness and dawn. Dawn had barely begun to spill its pale light across the rooftops when the lamplighter stood once more beneath the first lamp he had kindled on Main Street. The golden glow of the slender flame flickered gently in the growing brightness, its soft warmth already fading before the sun's rays had fully awakened the sky. He adjusted the lever on the gas valve, ensuring the flame remained steady while he prepared for the slow, deliberate work that defined this hour of morning maintenance and repairs. Around him, the silence lay thick on the cobblestones, a hush broken only by the distant caw of a lone crow and the gentle drip of dew from the eaves of houses. With careful hands, he retrieved from his satchel a small pot of tar, viscous, dark, and smelling faintly of pine pitch and old smoke. The vessel, its lid sealed shut through all these pre-dawn tasks, yielded with a quiet click. He scooped a small dab of the sticky substance onto the end of a narrow stick, mindful of the heat that lingered in the lamp's brass fittings. Steadying himself on tiptoe, he traced the hairline crack that ran like a tiny river across the inner surface of the glass globe. His motion was gentle yet precise. The tar seeped into the fissure, sealing it against the threat of wind and chill that might creep beneath the fragile barrier. The globe, once mottled with the fragile line, now bore only the faintest sheen where the pitch had been smoothed over, a subtle repair that would hold until the next scheduled overhaul. Stepping back, he clicked open the latch of the lamp housing and peered within. Long hours had allowed cobwebs to gather in the upper corners and small insects, most likely moths drawn by the promise of warmth, had taken to circling. Taking a slender rod he kept for just such occasions, he nudged the webs free, watching them drift to the stone pavement below in feathery fragments. A gentle knock near the base sent a handful of trembling flies scattering, their delicate wings brushing the wood as they fled into the soft morning air. With each stroke of the rod, he reminded himself of the quiet service he provided, cleansing the dark corners of the town, banishing the creatures that might dim or foul the lamps he tended. Beyond the lamp post, the river ran quietly at his feet, its current a soft murmur inviting reflection. He loosened the leather strap of his tool pouch and withdrew a stout spanner, its steel jaws polished smooth by years of work. A joint in the gas supply pipe, overspun and twisted by a late winter frost, required his attention. He placed the wrench around the joint, bracing his feet against the lip of the lamp's stone plinth. Leaning back with deliberate strength, he twisted the spanner until the joint gave with a satisfying click. He could almost feel the pipes sigh as they settled into proper alignment once more. With cautious fingers, he wiped away stray threads of soot and brass shavings, then tightened the fittings until the pipe lay true and undisturbed. For a moment he paused in his labors. Beyond the line of lamps stretching toward the bridge, the new morning light painted the sky in pale hues of rose and lavender. He slid the tool belt from his shoulders, setting it gently on the stone edge of the parapet. Drawing a breath, he leaned over the wall to admire the river's ribbon of silver, winding through bathhouses and gardens, reflecting the sky's slow awakening. A cool breeze drifted up from the water, carrying the earthy scent of river moss and wet limestone. He closed his eyes, letting the hush and beauty of the hour settle within him, a small gift before the day's work resumed. Refreshed by the moment of quiet, he returned to his kit. From a small oilskin-wrapped bundle, he unwrapped the leather cuff that protected his sleeve from sparks and soot. Moth-eaten though it was, the cuff remained indispensable, bearing the marks of countless mornings just like this. He slipped it into place, clicking its brass clasps into position, and uncovered a fine brush made of boar's bristles. With deft strokes, he brushed the outer glass globe until every smudge and fingerprint had vanished, restoring the clarity that let the flame shine true. He checked the hinge of the lamp door, ensuring it opened and closed with that particular weight, neither too loose to swing in the wind, nor so tight as to threaten the fragile glass with sudden pressure. At the base of the lamp, the cast iron post was pitted and scarred in places. He produced a length of rag, soaked in a solution of linseed oil and turpentine borrowed from his morning's tool inspection. With slow, gentle passes, he massaged the mixture into the metal, working out a small patch of corrosion that had begun to eat into the surface. The effect was subtle but meaningful, feeding the iron and renewing its luster against future wear. Each motion was methodical, almost ritualistic, as though each lamp were a patient under his careful tending, each repair a promise of the town's continued safety and warmth when dusk gathered once more. As the sun climbed higher, the village murmur began to swell. Distant voices rose from waking homes, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer punctuated the still air, and the faint aroma of freshly baked bread drifted from a bakery nearby. The lamplighter, having completed the thorough inspection and maintenance of half a dozen lamps along the riverside stretch, gathered his tools once more. He paused on the stone bridge, the mortar between the blocks warm beneath his booted feet. Turning, he gazed down at the water's gentle current, now gleaming with full morning light. The simple beauty of the scene granted him a single, quiet pride, that his work, though uncelebrated, was woven into the very fabric of the day's first effects. With a nod to himself and a final glance at the row of lamps standing ready for the coming hours, he slung his satchel over one shoulder and resumed his path. There were more fittings to tighten, more globes to cleanse, more tiny fissures to seal before the sun's high climb pronounced the morning's labors complete. Yet in that moment on the bridge, he felt the calm satisfaction of a craftsman who knew his calling was both humble and essential. As he stepped forward, the light settled around him like a benediction, and he continued into the heart of the village, ready to bring steadfast glow to each corner he passed. The morning had deepened beyond its first pale blush when the lamplighter stepped from the workshop door, his boots settling with gentle firmness on the cold stones of the street. A slender ribbon of mist still clung to the low eaves of the houses, and each inhalation brought a faint tang of wood smoke and damp earth. The sun, not yet fully risen, cast a muted glow through drifting vapor, gilding the crooked rooftops and the ornate ironwork of shutter hinges. In this tranquil hour, the town seemed poised between two worlds, no longer entirely dream, not yet wholly awake. He walked slowly as though savoring every moment of the hush, his leather satchel hanging from one shoulder, its weight a familiar comfort. Inside it lay the ledger for today's notations and a small cloth-wrapped bundle of spare wick holders. Each step echoed softly upon the cobbles, mingling with the distant purring of a canal boat gliding beneath the stone arch of the oldest bridge. At intervals, the glass globes he had cleaned and oiled only a short time before caught stray shafts of dawn, turning the gaslight within to a honeyed ember that trembled gently in the cool air. Turning a corner, he approached the bakery where even now the ovens were being stoked with fresh fire, and the air ran thick with the scent of rising dough. The baker, lean and energetic, crouched beside a low window, sliding plump loaves onto a wooden rack. He wore a flour-dusted apron and cocked his head as the lamplighter paused. Their eyes met, and the lamplighter inclined his head in greeting, offering a small courtesy that passed between them like a private accord. The baker returned the gesture with a broad smile, splattering a wisp of steam from the banneton with the tip of his forefinger. "Good morning, sir," the baker called, his voice warm as the ovens behind him. "Those lamps of yours make the shop front look a proper jewel before the sun's even risen." The lamplighter nodded, mindful of the hour but pleased all the same. "Thank you. I find they grant the baker's door a fine welcome for early patrons." He continued on, the baker's laughter following him like a fleeting echo. Beyond the bakery, the street widened into the old market lane, where empty stalls waited in patient silence. The awnings, rolled up against the coming day, flapped like idle guides. Here and there, a lantern he had lit earlier burned low, its flame steady and calm. He paused by one such lamp, lifted his hand to brush away a silken strand of spider's web, and watched as a tiny moth, disturbed by the movement, drifted upward in a sudden swirl before finding refuge among the curved ironwork above. In the distance, church bells began to toll, a sonorous call rolling over the rooftops and bouncing from the river's glassy surface. The lamplighter halted and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the deep resonance settle in his chest. Each peal marked a measure of time, half past dawn, half past his journey's halfway point. The sound reminded him of childhood Sundays, when he would follow his own father along these same stones, trailing behind with an apprentice's awe. He opened his eyes and pressed on. The chill in the air had eased slightly. The mist was thinning now and lifting in small spirals as sunlight burned through. His breath, once a cloud in the morning air, had grown faint and insubstantial. Overhead, some of the street lamps, no longer needed, beckoned together in quiet resignation, their wrought iron arms stretched like soldiers at rest. At the town gate, newly installed posts awaited his inspection. 3 stood in a neat row upon the rampart's edge, each crowned with a globe of pressed glass. He drew near and ran his fingertips along the brass collars, verifying they were tightly fastened, that no pin had loosened overnight. The globes gleamed with dewy clarity, and inside each a fresh wick rose like a pale stalk, trimmed to perfect uniformity. He took a moment to admire their symmetry, the way they stood like sentries at the boundary between home and countryside. Beneath his hand, each post vibrated faintly with the distant strains of village life, the clip-clop of a horse's hoof on a cobblestone, the soft creak of a milk cart's wheel, the almost imperceptible hum of early conversation at a tavern hearth. He permitted himself a slight smile at the thought that his own work provided the scaffolding upon which the morning's bustle would rely. Without these lamps, the dawn would come too much at once, but with them each merchant, each mother carrying a child, each sleepy schoolboy could crossroads find their footing by a gentle, unwavering light. He stepped back to survey the trio of lamps at once, noting how the cool patina of their brass finials complemented the pale stone of the gate. For a brief instant, he imagined them blazing against a dark sky, how a traveler from beyond the hills might sigh with relief at their sight, marking safe return to hearth and kin. It was a grand thought for so modest a task, yet he felt pride swell quietly in his breast. After this, he resumed his path down the incline toward the riverside lane. Here the air carried a shimmer of moisture rising from the water, and the lamps he had already lit pooled flecked reflections upon the seeping stones. On either side, the weeping willows bowed so their branches almost brushed the surface, and he could hear the distant clang of a boatman's pole tapping against the keel. The bell tolls had ceased, replaced by the gentle lapping of water passing beneath pilings. He passed another lamp, one he had patched with a thin ribbon of tar only days before, and paused to run his spanner lightly around its base. Satisfied that no escape of gas would sneak past the joint, he gave a soft nod as though sharing a secret between craftsman and creation. Then, shouldering his satchel once more, he carried on along the quay. At a narrow bend, he encountered a lone fisherman unloading baskets of roach and carp. The fisherman was dressed in a heavy frock coat, boots caked with mud from the riverbank. He glanced up at the street lamps, which stood silent sentries overhead. The lamplighter offered a simple greeting, and the fisherman tipped his cap in return. For a heartbeat, their greetings formed a private ceremony in the half-light, two men whose labors, though different, both served the waking town. Continuing on, the lamplighter noticed a few households already stirring. A laundry woman hung damp linens between two iron hooks near a lamp post, her arms stretching wide as she shook the cloth to free it of wrinkles. Each piece fluttered in the gentle breeze, catching the lamplight until the sun claimed it. Further along, a couple emerged from a narrow doorway to sweep their stoop, the bristles of their besom broom whispering against the paving stones. They paused as he passed to offer a brief nod, and he felt the subtle warmth of shared routine in that silent acknowledgement. By now, the day had surrendered nearly all of its cool against the rising warmth of sunlit air. The mist had dissolved entirely, revealing chimney stacks crisp against the pale blue sky. Only a few lamps remained lit, their flames flickering as if reluctant to yield. The lamplighter stopped before one such fixture, lifting his gaze to the pale plume of smoke escaping the chimney above. He reached into his satchel, drew out the ledger, and entered a precise note: 6 lamps unlit by 8:10 a.m. 3 globe fittings checked near the town gate. Air brisk clear. No repairs needed at Riverside. He closed the ledger and slid it carefully back into place. Drawing a final breath of the tranquil morning, he allowed himself a moment to absorb the scene, the silent lamps beginning to fade as the sun climbed high, the gentle stirring of the townsfolk preparing for commerce and conversation, the distant drone of a farmer's wagon rattling along the high road. All was orderly, all was calm, and in every corner the promise of a steady, well-lit night yet to come lingered as assurance. With measured steps, he turned at last toward the coaching inn at the market's edge, ready to partake of a simple midday repast and to rest the weight of ladder and spanner for but a brief interval. Yet even as he went, the memory of his quiet stroll remained, the soft footfalls, the chorus of distant bells, the steadfast glow of each gaslit sentinel that stood between slumber and waking day. In these moments, the lamplighter found the essence of his craft: to guide, to guard, and to illuminate not only the streets but the gentle rhythm of life that flowed through them. The gate of the coaching inn swung open with a soft creak as he stepped from the sunlit street into the shadowed courtyard, the air turning gently warmer against his face. A stray beam of midday sun pierced through the weathered eaves and fell upon the worn cobblestones, while overhead, the timbered balconies cast latticework shadows that danced slowly in the stillness. He paused, hat in hand, and tilted his head upward to admire the building's heavy oak beams, blackened by time and rain. A single bell tinkled somewhere within, summoning him to the hearth. He crossed the courtyard on legs that ached with purpose, a dull throb reminding him of every lamp he had touched since dawn. The leather of his coat, once supple, now bore the creases of a man long accustomed to long hours on foot and long nights alight with flame. With a sigh he drew nearer to the door, running a gloved finger over its iron knocker before letting himself in. The inviolable hush of the inn enveloped him, broken only by the low crackle of firewood and the distant scrape of a chair as some other weary traveler rose to greet the afternoon. Removing his small leather satchel, he set it upon a bench near a broad mantelpiece on which the embers glowed red. A fire of split logs burned in the wide hearth, flames curling softly around a cast-iron kettle stick. He lifted one muddy boot and eased it off with care, wincing as each stiff movement tugged at tired sinews. His foot, wrapped in a linen sock darkened with dust, sought the fringe of an old hearth rug. He repeated the motion with the second boot, an imperfect mirror of the first, and then stretched both legs before the crackling warmth. The simple pleasure of heat against chilled limbs was enough to slow his breathing, to remind him of the smaller comforts that greeted him in every pause between tasks. A serving maid approached, balanced a shallow earthenware bowl upon a low table and bowed. The bowl contained broth, thin, nearly transparent, yet fragrant with the faintest hint of carrot and parsley. Steam rose in a lazy swirl, carrying within it memories of dawn's mist on the riverbank and of cottages where lamplight had yet to yield to daylight. He lifted the bowl with both hands, nodding his thanks, and a second maid set a wooden spoon beside him. He inhaled deeply, letting the aroma anchor him to the moment. Then, raising the spoon in deliberate slowness, he drew a cautious first sip. The warm liquid spread down his throat, soothing as a lullaby after a night's vigil. Across the wide hearth, a coachman settled onto a battered stool. His weather-beaten face was framed by loose curls of coal-dark hair, and his riding boots bore the imprint of many roads. In his hand he held a cracked tankard of ale, still half full. He spotted the lamplighter and nodded a rough greeting. Between them was a half-laden table, a loaf of crusty bread, a wedge of pale cheese, and a small dish of pickled onions. The lamplighter dipped a hunk of bread into the broth, then tore it apart with his teeth and set it aside as he offered the bowl to the coachman for a taste. "Thank you kindly," the coachman said and raised the bowl to his lips. He slurped the broth with satisfying noise, then settled it back upon the table. "Your work begins early," he observed. "I've spotted your lamps burning on the turnpike before the crows are half awake." The lamplighter allowed a small smile. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temple. "It seems the town depends on me to bid farewell to the night. By the time I cross the river bridge, the eastern sky is already pale. Outside, the great bell at St. Mary's tolled the hour of midday, its sonorous peals trembling through the rafters. The inn's oak beams shivered under the weight of each strike, and the coachman's hand trembled slightly as he drank." The lamplighter set aside his bowl and drew from his satchel a narrow ivory-bound journal. Its pages were filled with neat columns of times and lamp numbers, interleaved with slender sketches of posts that needed repair. He flipped to the current day, browsed the hour-by-hour entries, and then laid the journal open upon the table. A stub of pencil lay within the binding, its tip sharpened to a fine point. He tapped it thoughtfully against the wood grain. "Any trouble this morn?" the coachman asked, nodding at the book. "Just a spider that spun between the globe and its frame," said the lamplighter. "A twist along the gas line near the town gate, but nothing I could not straighten." He dipped his hand into a pocket and withdrew a small slip of paper, a hastily drawn map of the outer district's lanterns. "I'll need to check 3 more over there, and then make my way back to the reservoir to refill the portable tanks." The coachman leaned forward, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Your route changes so little, yet you must memorize every forge and byway. I can hardly recall each toll stop along my own journeys." The lamplighter smiled again, reclining into the chair's worn back. "It's all in the ledger. The name of each lamp, the number of its globe, the depth of its wick. By the time evening comes, I will walk these streets as if they were the lines of my own hand." He caught the coachman's eye for a moment. "Besides, it comforts me to know that if a lamp falters, I can find the exact spot in a second." He turned a page and fingered the crease where a drop of soot had fallen last night, leaving a small, stubborn mark. A glimmer of pride warmed him at the precision of his record-keeping. Every ignition time, every flicker of wind-swept flame, and every fix had its place on these pages. The serving maid returned, refilling his bowl with more broth. He thanked her, careful not to spill a drop as he resumed his notes. The steam swirled once more, mingling with the faint scent of burning oil that clung to his coat. He watched the vapor drift toward the rafters, imagining it rising in a dark lantern shaft before giving form to a soft, golden glow. Time slipped by in the hushed comfort of the coaching inn. Beyond the leaded glass windows, the sun climbed its arc, and the murmur of distant hoofbeats drifted in. A coach rattled past on the main street, its carriage lamps unlit, but the larger lamp posts he would soon tend already marked every corner with steady brilliance. He paused in his planning to peer out at them, as a man admires lanterns on water at evening's edge. In that brief glance, he saw each lamp as a friend he would visit again when tonight's shadows descended. Once his bowl was empty, he rose and tucked his journal and pencil back into the leather satchel. He lifted the kettle from the hearth and set it down with a soft hollow sound, then picked up his coat. He shrugged its weight onto his shoulders, feeling the familiar comfort of its folds. The coachman rose to his feet as well, stretching his back and shouldering a heavy whip. "May your afternoon be untroubled," the coachman said earnestly. "And yours swift and safe," replied the lamplighter. He retrieved his muddy boots, slipped them on, and tested a step. The hearth's glow lingered in his memory as he crossed the threshold of the inn. Once in the courtyard, he paused to glance at the sign above the door, the painted figure of a galloping horse leaping toward a distant horizon. He inhaled the mingled scents of smoke, straw, and earth, then turned his gaze to the map in his hand. The afternoon route lay before him, a series of neat loops amid the quiet streets and hidden alleys. He stepped forward, the boots making soft thuds upon the sun-warmed cobbles. With each measured footfall, the warmth of the coaching inn began to recede, replaced by the cooler breath of empty lanes awaiting his flame. He paused briefly at the gate, offering a respectful nod to the silent facade of the inn before continuing onward, journal in hand, ready to tend the lamps that would soon stand vigil again as evening approached. The gate of the coaching inn swung open with a soft creak as he stepped from the sunlit street into the shadowed courtyard, the air turning gently warmer against his face. A stray beam of midday sun pierced through the weathered eaves and fell upon the worn cobblestones, while overhead, the timbered balconies cast latticework shadows that danced slowly in the stillness. He paused, hat in hand, and tilted his head upward to admire the building's heavy oak beams, blackened by time and rain. A single bell tinkled somewhere within, summoning him to the hearth. He crossed the courtyard on legs that ached with purpose, a dull throb reminding him of every lamp he had touched since dawn. The leather of his coat, once supple, now bore the creases of a man long accustomed to long hours on foot and long nights alight with flame. With a sigh he drew nearer to the door, running a gloved finger over its iron knocker before letting himself in. The inviolable hush of the inn enveloped him, broken only by the low crackle of firewood and the distant scrape of a chair as some other weary traveler rose to greet the afternoon. Removing his small leather satchel, he set it upon a bench near a broad mantelpiece on which the embers glowed red. A fire of split logs burned in the wide hearth, flames curling softly around a cast-iron kettle stick. He lifted one muddy boot and eased it off with care, wincing as each stiff movement tugged at tired sinews. His foot, wrapped in a linen sock darkened with dust, sought the fringe of an old hearth rug. He repeated the motion with the second boot, an imperfect mirror of the first, and then stretched both legs before the crackling warmth. The simple pleasure of heat against chilled limbs was enough to slow his breathing, to remind him of the smaller comforts that greeted him in every pause between tasks. A serving maid approached, balanced a shallow earthenware bowl upon a low table and bowed. The bowl contained broth, thin, nearly transparent, yet fragrant with the faintest hint of carrot and parsley. Steam rose in a lazy swirl, carrying within it memories of dawn's mist on the riverbank and of cottages where lamplight had yet to yield to daylight. He lifted the bowl with both hands, nodding his thanks, and a second maid set a wooden spoon beside him. He inhaled deeply, letting the aroma anchor him to the moment. Then, raising the spoon in deliberate slowness, he drew a cautious first sip. The warm liquid spread down his throat, soothing as a lullaby after a night's vigil. Across the wide hearth, a coachman settled onto a battered stool. His weather-beaten face was framed by loose curls of coal-dark hair, and his riding boots bore the imprint of many roads. In his hand he held a cracked tankard of ale, still half full. He spotted the lamplighter and nodded a rough greeting. Between them was a half-laden table, a loaf of crusty bread, a wedge of pale cheese, and a small dish of pickled onions. The lamplighter dipped a hunk of bread into the broth, then tore it apart with his teeth and set it aside as he offered the bowl to the coachman for a taste. "Thank you kindly," the coachman said, and raised the bowl to his lips. He slurped the broth with satisfying noise, then settled it back upon the table. "Your work begins early," he observed. "I've spotted your lamps burning on the turnpike before the crows are half awake." The lamplighter allowed a small smile. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temple. "It seems the town depends on me to bid farewell to the night. By the time I cross the river bridge, the eastern sky is already pale. Outside, the great bell at St. Mary's tolled the hour of midday, its sonorous peals trembling through the rafters. The inn's oak beams shivered under the weight of each strike, and the coachman's hand trembled slightly as he drank. The lamplighter set aside his bowl and drew from his satchel a narrow ivory-bound journal. Its pages were filled with neat columns of times and lamp numbers, interleaved with slender sketches of posts that needed repair. He flipped to the current day, browsed the hour-by-hour entries, and then laid the journal open upon the table. A stub of pencil lay within the binding, its tip sharpened to a fine point. He tapped it thoughtfully against the wood grain. "Any trouble this morn?" the coachman asked, nodding at the book. "Just a spider that spun between the globe and its frame," said the lamplighter. "A twist along the gas line near the town gate, but nothing I could not straighten." He dipped his hand into a pocket and withdrew a small slip of paper, a hastily drawn map of the outer district's lanterns. "I'll need to check 3 more over there, and then make my way back to the reservoir to refill the portable tanks." The coachman leaned forward, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Your route changes so little, yet you must memorize every forge and byway. I can hardly recall each toll stop along my own journeys." The lamplighter smiled again, reclining into the chair's worn back. "It's all in the ledger. The name of each lamp, the number of its globe, the depth of its wick. By the time evening comes, I will walk these streets as if they were the lines of my own hand." He caught the coachman's eye for a moment. "Besides, it comforts me to know that if a lamp falters, I can find the exact spot in a second." He turned a page and fingered the crease where a drop of soot had fallen last night, leaving a small, stubborn mark. A glimmer of pride warmed him at the precision of his record-keeping. Every ignition time, every flicker of wind-swept flame, and every fix had its place on these pages. The serving maid returned, refilling his bowl with more broth. He thanked her, careful not to spill a drop as he resumed his notes. The steam swirled once more, mingling with the faint scent of burning oil that clung to his coat. He watched the vapor drift toward the rafters, imagining it rising in a dark lantern shaft before giving form to a soft, golden glow. Time slipped by in the hushed comfort of the coaching inn. Beyond the leaded glass windows, the sun climbed its arc, and the murmur of distant hoofbeats drifted in. A coach rattled past on the main street, its carriage lamps unlit, but the larger lamp-posts he would soon tend already marked every corner with steady brilliance. He paused in his planning to peer out at them, as a man admires lanterns on water at evening's edge. In that brief glance, he saw each lamp as a friend he would visit again when tonight's shadows descended. Once his bowl was empty, he rose and tucked his journal and pencil back into the leather satchel. He lifted the kettle from the hearth and set it down with a soft hollow sound, then picked up his coat. He shrugged its weight onto his shoulders, feeling the familiar comfort of its folds. The coachman rose to his feet as well, stretching his back and shouldering a heavy whip. "May your afternoon be untroubled," the coachman said earnestly. "And yours swift and safe," replied the lamplighter. He retrieved his muddy boots, slipped them on, and tested a step. The hearth's glow lingered in his memory as he crossed the threshold of the inn. Once in the courtyard, he paused to glance at the sign above the door, the painted figure of a galloping horse leaping toward a distant horizon. He inhaled the mingled scents of smoke, straw, and earth, then turned his gaze to the map in his hand. The afternoon route lay before him, a series of neat loops amid the quiet streets and hidden alleys. He stepped forward, the boots making soft thuds upon the sun-warmed cobbles. With each measured footfall, the warmth of the coaching inn began to recede, replaced by the cooler breath of empty lanes awaiting his flame. He paused briefly at the gate, offering a respectful nod to the silent facade of the inn before continuing onward, journal in hand, ready to tend the lamps that would soon stand vigil again as evening approached. He stepped from the dim interior of his workshop into the sunlight that bathed the market square. The late afternoon light, slanted and warm, cast a soft glow upon the fading crowds and merchants' stalls. It was a gentle reprieve from the hush of stone and glass he inhabited while tending his lamps. Here, the clamor of daily bargaining, the rustle of canvas awnings, and the drone of voices rose around him in a comforting chorus. He moved deliberately, each booted footfall on the worn cobbles a steady echo. In this hour he was not merely the lamplighter of the town. He was one among many souls, trader, child, artisan, sharing this common space before they scattered to their various tasks. He first paused before a modest stall draped in faded blue cloth, where a delicate profusion of spring flowers lay heaped upon a wooden table. Daisies, their faces bright as miniature suns, stalks of hyacinth, curling in fragrant clusters, and slender stalks of lavender, their buds still tightly furled, gave off a heady, honeyed scent. The flower seller, an elderly woman whose hands were yellowed by years of handling petals, looked up as he approached. She smiled with a mixture of shyness and pride, as though her blooms were both her livelihood and her secret joy. He reached into the pocket of his coat and withdrew a solitary copper coin, its edges smooth from long circulation, and offered it to her in a gesture both practical and kind. With deliberate grace she accepted it, the copper piece catching the light for a brief, bright moment. In return, she plucked a single sprig of lavender from the bundle, bound it with a slender thread, and pressed it into his palm. He inhaled its cool, sweet aroma, picturing the faint purple haze it would lend to the air around him as he carried it home. For a moment, the weight of his lanterns, oil cans, and wicks felt lighter, as though the simple blossom had lent him a hint of her gentle serenity. He drifted onward, the hush of twilight's approach whispering through the lanes branching from the square. The air was becoming cooler now, and the shadows lengthened between the stalls of leather goods, bolts of cloth, and baskets brimming with fresh produce. His next stop was at a tailor's stand beneath a canvas awning stretched taut like a pale sail. A stocky tailor with threadbare coat and scissors hanging from his belt looked up at the lamplighter's approach, frustration creasing his brow like folds in worn cloth. The tailor's stall was neat, each roll of linen and wool stacked with care, but his face was pinched. As the lamplighter leaned casually against the wooden post, the tailor began to offload his thoughts. How prices for good linen had soared since the last harvest, how merchants insisted on payment in advance, leaving him with scarce coin to repair his own trousers, how the fickle weather threatened to ruin yards of cloth left too long in the damp open air. He spoke in clipped sentences, punctuated by sharp gestures toward his inventory. The lamplighter listened, nodding attentively, as though each complaint merited the same measured attention he gave to tuning his wick holders. When the tailor paused for breath, the lamplighter offered what comfort he could, a few encouraging words, a promise to spread the tailor's name among the tradesmen he met later, and a copper coin slipped into the tailor's palm. The tailor blinked, surprised by such generosity, then managed a wan smile before returning to set his clamps upon a length of linen. Beyond the tailor's corner, laughter caught his ear, bright, ringing, unself-conscious. He turned to find a small group of children chasing a stray dog around the town fountain. The dog, lean and sandy in hue, darted this way and that, its tail a plume of excitement, while the children clapped their hands and squealed in delight. A little boy with tousled hair lifted a stick, too big for his frame, and waved it in playful threat. The dog darted under a stall, sending a pile of shallots rolling across the pavement. The children gave chase, stumbling over their own feet, and the lamplighter paused to watch with quiet amusement. One young girl, her pinafore frilled with lace, bent to gather the fallen onions, tucking them carefully into a basket at her side as though they were treasures retrieved from the deep. Nearby, an older lad scooped the dog into his arms, cradling it like a child. The dog licked the boy's cheek, earning peals of delighted laughter from the watcher. For a fleeting moment, the lamplighter felt an echo of his own childhood, days spent with friends in winding lanes, playing until the sky grew dark and mothers called them home. He stooped to pat the dog's head, feeling its fur rough beneath his glove, then straightened and continued on his way. His final meeting in the square was at the grocer's cart, parked beneath an elm whose leaves cast lace-like patterns upon the ground. Rich fruits tumbled from wooden crates, polished apples the color of sunrise, pears mottled with green and gold, figs soft and plump. The grocer was a broad-shouldered man, red-cheeked from sun and toil, his leather apron stained by years of honeyed syrup and fruit juice. When the lamplighter approached, the grocer offered an apple with a wink and a grin. "For your trouble, friend," he said, as though this small gift were long overdue. The lamplighter accepted the fruit, its skin cool and smooth beneath his fingers, and bit into it. The crisp flesh yielded with a faint crunch and a sweet, tart juice ran down his wrist. He closed his eyes momentarily, savoring the flavor and the goodwill behind it. He placed the coin he offered on the counter, along with a word of thanks for the grocer's constant cheerfulness. The grocer laughed, clapped the lamplighter on the shoulder, and turned to serve another customer with the same generous spirit. The market's bustle began to wane. Vendors turned their tables toward the back of their carts, tidying shutters and folding awnings. The lamplighter, too, felt the familiar tug of duty calling him back to the steady rhythm of his workshop. Yet as he retraced his steps amid the emptying lanes, he carried with him the warmth of these small exchanges. Each coin spent, each flower sprig, each shared complaint, each laugh with children and gift of fruit, these were the unseen threads binding him to the town he illuminated night after night. He inhaled once more, smelling the faint trace of lavender in his coat pocket, the mingled aromas of fresh produce and trampled earth, and felt the low hum of human life still resonant in the cooling air. He paused at the edge of the square, where the first lengthening shadows of the afternoon mingled with the approach of dusk. Beyond the busy stalls and clearing voices, the rows of gas lamps stood silent and unlit, waiting for his return. He tucked the sprig of lavender into his coat lapel, its fragrance a small comfort against the weight of his oil cans and the knowledge that the final leg of his day lay still before him. With a steadying breath, he turned toward home, each footstep carrying him away from the lively hub of afternoon commerce and back into the quiet diligence of his calling. In his heart, he carried the memory of gentle laughter, shared hardships, and brief, generous moments of human kindness, precious fuel for the long night ahead. By the time the sun had climbed to its mid-afternoon height, the lamplighter found himself once more within the familiar coolness of his little workshop. A soft light filtered through the small leaded window panes, casting latticed shadows upon the worn plank floor. The air held a gentle hush, broken only by the distant murmur of carts on cobblestones and the faint drip of rainwater still clinging to the eaves from a brief shower earlier in the day. Here, beneath the sturdy beams darkened by years of smoke, he would undertake the careful tasks that would ensure each lamp glowed steadily when dusk returned. He set aside his leather satchel, hung his stout wool cloak on a peg by the door, and shook out the hem of his linen shirt. His boots, still damp at the soles, left dark prints upon the boards, reminders of the winding streets he had traversed to reach this haven of tools and timber. A narrow table stood at the room's center, scarred by countless hours of use. Its surface bore shallow gouges from shears and scratches from brass wrenches. Upon it lay neat piles of lamp wicks and freshly emptied flasks, evidences of the work to come. Gently he reached for a bundle of cotton wicks, each one swaddled in paper to keep it clean. He unwrapped them with care, allowing them to unfurl on the table like small white banners. One by one he placed them side by side upon a slender wooden board, smoothing out any twists or folds. His fingers, slender and nimble, moved with practiced precision. A glimmer of sunlight from the window glinted upon the board's surface, illuminating the neat rows of fibers. He paused to admire their simple purity, recalling how, come evening, these same wicks would cradle tiny flames that lit the way for villagers walking home. He reached for the small shears, their steel blades dulled slightly by soot and years of use. He brought them close to his eyes to inspect the edges, ensuring they remained sharp enough to grant a clean cut. With each snip, he removed a fraction of charred tip or stray fiber, watching microscopic curls fall onto the board. There was a steady rhythm to the work. Pick up a wick, measure its length against a narrow brass gauge, snip away the uneven threads, then lay it gently back in place. Over and over until dozens of wicks lay trimmed and primed. The sound of metal meeting metal echoed quietly, a soft punctuation in the stillness. As he worked, his thoughts drifted to the lamps that lined the town streets. He imagined the orange flicker as each flame caught, the way shadows would retreat, how windows would glow with evening gatherings. In that thought he found his purpose renewed. Each wick he trimmed was an offering of light, a beacon to guide weary travelers and townsfolk alike. When the final thread had been clipped, he set the shears aside and wiped them clean with a rag dappled in light oil. He then fetched a small wooden crate from a low shelf, its slats weathered and darkened by spilled kerosene. Opening its lid, he revealed a row of empty glass flasks, slender and elegant. Their smooth sides reflected the workshop's dim glow. He lifted one, turning it thoughtfully between his hands. It bore faint fingerprints from previous fillings, ghostly smudges that he now wiped away. Next to the crate stood a polished brass funnel, its spout narrow and precise. He placed the first flask beneath it, then gingerly lifted a larger oil canister from the workbench. The canister was warm just enough by his palm to loosen the thick liquid inside. He unscrewed its cork lid and held it to his nose. An almost imperceptible whiff of sweetness and smoke rose, a scent that he had come to know as comfort rather than hazard. With steady hands he tipped the canister, guiding the oil through the funnel in a steady golden stream. The flask filled slowly, each tendril of liquid swaying within like a captured sunrise. Once the level reached a fine mark inscribed upon the glass, he steadied the flask, removed the funnel, and pressed a fresh cork into its neck. A gentle tap ensured a snug seal. He then picked up a small tag of parchment and a stub of quill. Dipping the tip into a pot of dark ink, he wrote in his neat looping script, "Evening batch, Bien, 1 3/4 Doctor." He allowed the ink a moment to dry, then tied the tag securely around the flask's slender neck with a fine thread of linen. One by one he repeated these motions, pouring oil, sealing each container and affixing a label. With every finished flask, he lined them up in precise alignment along a narrow shelf overhead. The shelf soon held a regiment of tiny glass soldiers, each waiting patiently to fulfill its duty. He paused to survey his handiwork. The amber row looked almost like a field of captured sunlight, and he felt a rare glow of satisfaction stir within his chest. Beyond the immediate tasks lay the unspoken rhythms of his days. He recalled the smell of the coaching inn's thin broth, the friendly chide of the coachman, the laughter of children amid the market stalls. Now, in the hush of the workshop, he was alone once more, but not lonely. The litany of his carefully ordered motions gave rise to a quiet contentment, a sense that each measured cut and measured pour bore meaning in the larger tapestry of village life. A faint tick from the clock mounted on the wall reminded him that time moved steadily forward. He set aside the empty oil canister, wiping its exterior with a clean scrap of linen before returning it to its place. Then he fetched an additional bale of fresh cotton wicks, still bundled in coarse wrapping, and placed them on the table. He would fold and feather these in due course, preparing them for the next morning's supply. Outside, a stray shaft of sunlight slipped beneath the curtain, glancing off a row of glass lanterns waiting patiently in a corner. They would soon be filled too and mounted upon poles throughout the town. He rose and walked slowly to that corner, running a fingertip along the edge of one lantern's metal frame. He inhaled the faint scent of cooled glass and metal, a smell that to him signified readiness and purpose. Returning to the table, he retrieved his ledger, a small cloth-bound book with delicate lined pages. He opened to today's date and with a practiced hand, recorded the count of wicks trimmed and the number of flasks filled. Each entry was made in the same careful script that had once christened his earliest lamp ignitions. He noted as well any observations: one pair of shears showing signs of wear, a small corroded patch on a brass nozzle needing later attention. These notes would guide tomorrow's work. When at last his ledger lay closed and his tools were once again organized, shears back in their leather sheath, funnel polished and set aside, he surveyed the room with a quiet pride. The workshop, now orderly and bright with promise, felt like a sanctuary. Outside, the afternoon breeze might rustle the trees or carry distant voices, but here all was composed, measured, and calm. He stepped to the door and drew the wool cloak about his shoulders once more. In a moment, the evening assignment would beckon, and he would carry these lanterns, these prepared wicks, into the lengthening twilight. For now, though, he lingered briefly at the threshold, inhaling the scent of oiled wood and pressed cotton. The day's most intricate labors were behind him, the fruits of his patient labor arranged in neat rows before him. Then, with a final glance, he closed the door behind him. The lamplighter's afternoon task was complete, and in every carefully trimmed wick and each flask of pure golden oil lay the promise of gentle brilliance yet to come. The sky hangs low and leaden when Thomas steps from the workshop's threshold, its thick slate-colored cloud bank pressed close against the rooftops. A solitary wisp of wind scuttles around the chimneys, carrying the damp promise of rain. He pauses for a moment, letting the hush of gathering dusk settle over him, the distant toll of the clock tower bearing witness to the hour. His boots, still tinged with the faint scent of oil from the day's labors, shift onto the damp cobbles. Already, twilight has begun its insistent creep, staining the horizon a pale pewter. Thomas reaches up and draws the collar of his heavy woolen coat a little higher, fingers brushing over fine stitches dyed a deep chestnut. The coat has seen many seasons, its elbows patched once with a scrap of burlap, it seems reinforced more than a dozen times by careful hands. Tonight, it feels both a comfort and a shield against the damp chill that gathers in the air. He tightens the straps of his oilskin gloves, feeling the rough grain of treated leather under his fingertips. They too bear the marks of countless tasks. Faint smudges of soot along the seams, small stains where a drop of turpentine once landed. A sudden, solitary drop of rain catches him by surprise, landing on the back of his hand with a light, tickling cold. He raises his gaze. The clouds have thickened still further, pooling overhead in shifting currents. He glances at his pocket watch, an heirloom passed down from his father, a brass-faced relic whose hands now hover near 5:30. Normally, there would be a quiet margin yet before he must begin his evening round. But under these overcast skies, daylight leaks away far sooner. Thomas breathes out slowly, the air escaping his lips in a soft plume of vapor. Time is measured not only by the ticking of watch springs but by the fading of light. He knows that each moment lost to gathering gloom must be reclaimed later in lantern glow. A low wind murmurs through the narrow alley, tugging at the ends of his scarf. He tugs it a little tighter around his neck, weaving one end through a loose loop to keep the wool from slipping as he hurries along. Each step he takes sends a faint echo off the stone walls, a measured tap-tap-tap that mingles with the distant clatter of shutters being closed and carts creaking to a halt. He heads toward the elm tree that stands sentinel at the corner of Maple Lane and Bridge Street. In fair weather, he might press on directly to the first lamp, but tonight the droplets begin thickening, drumming in a gentle patter on his broad-brimmed hat. Better to wait, he thinks, until the worst of this little shower passes. Under the spread of the elm's broad, gnarled limbs, he finds a momentary refuge. The rough bark glistens as rain runs down in rivulets, pooling at the base of the trunk. Thomas stands beneath its leafy canopy, shoulders hunched, listening to the wet patter overhead, and allowing himself a single breath of pause. He reaches into the satchel slung over one shoulder and lifts out a small cloth, linen only half the size of his handkerchief, yet precious for its softness. He uses it to dab at the rain on his hat brim and the crease of his coat, careful to keep the gold foil insignia on his lamplighter's badge gleaming. The badge, though small, bears the crest of the borough, a shield emblazoned with 3 flickering flames. Rain will tarnish the metal if it lingers too long, and so he takes these little measures as if tending the uniform were no less important than tending the lamps themselves. The air smells of damp earth and stone, mixed with the faint tinge of kerosene that clings to his coat. With each inhalation, he anticipates the tang of fresh rain mingled with the lingering payoff of his day's work. A tiny droplet slips from the brim of his hat, tracing a cold line down his temple. He brushes it away absent-mindedly, fingers already growing damp as they press against the wool of his scarf. The shutters of the bookbinder's shop across the street are drawn. Behind the small gauged pane of glass, a single candle glows golden, casting long shadows across stacked tomes. Thomas lifts his gaze to the rooftops lining the street. Gray tiles interlock in neat rows, each ridge supporting a tangle of ivy or a tufty sprig of moss. Thin tendrils of smoke still rise from half a dozen chimneys, carrying the last comfort of supper fires, stews of root vegetables, roast fowl, or barley broth. The lamps that edge the square are still dormant, tiny black silhouettes atop their slender posts. Soon he will be high among them, ascending wooden steps to coax flame from gas jets, to remove spider webs and tighten loose fittings. But for this moment under the elm, he allows the world its gentle softening in rain and dusk. He checks the satchel again, making sure each glass flask is secured in its leather cradle. The evening oil must be pure and ready, no time for spills when shadows are closing in. He counts in his mind the lamps he will tend before returning to the square, 7 to the east for more along the riverside, and a final cluster by the old iron bridge. Each will require care, trimming of wicks, a swift twist of the valve, and the steadying lift of match to flame. Already he envisions the modest blaze that will grow within each lamp's copper globe, scattering shadows and beckoning townsfolk from their homes. A gust of wind hisses through the bare branches overhead, and Thomas shivers. He flexes his shoulders, the stiff wool of his coat creaking softly. Above him the elm's leaves darken to deep green, slick with the fresh rain. The downpour eases, tapering to a final drip. He tilts his chin upward and notes that the clouds have parted in a narrow seam, revealing a sliver of pale, fading sky. His watch now marked nearly 6 o'clock. The time has come. He steps away from the shelter of the tree, pushing the hat brim forward to shield his eyes. A few lanterns have begun to glow faintly in shop windows, but the street lamps await his hand. He walks with measured haste, neither too swift to risk clumsiness nor too slow to be taken by darkness. His footfalls fall in quiet rhythm on the smooth, rain-washed stones. In each stride he carries the weight of evening's promise, that where there was gloom he will leave warmth, where there was uncertainty he will set the lamp alight and kindle small beacons. To him, these glowing orbs are more than mere fixtures. They are sentinels of comfort, the hearth of every street he traverses. Exiting the elm's shelter, Thomas rounds the corner and glimpses the first lamp post, its iron arm extended like a bent elbow. He settles his satchel at its base, opens the valve with a soft hiss and prepares his match. Above, the sky glows faintly in the western clouds, pink and gold still lingering where the sun has sunk beyond the hills. In that fleeting hue lies the threshold between day's end and night's reign. With calm certainty he strikes the match. A small spark, a gentle swallow of flame, and at last the first of his evening lamps awakens, its warm light drifting across glistening cobblestones, racing back the gathering dark. The workshop lay quiet now, its narrow windows darkening as the sun dipped low behind wandering clouds. Within, the lamplighter moved with deliberate calm, each gesture measured and familiar, as though guided by some ancient ritual. He paused by the small brass clock on the workbench, noting the position of the hands, 5:30. With evening's cool hush settling over the town, he knew the second leg of his solitary journey would begin soon. A faint breeze crept through a crack in the shutter, carrying a scent of damp earth and distant smoke. It reminded him that twilight would not wait, and so he set aside the leather journal in which he had recorded the midday inspections and oil measurements. The pages lay open, a neat tally of each lamp's glass integrity and each wick's length. Now was the time for action, for gathering the tools that would carry him through the closing hours. He turned his attention to the rack of wooden steps resting against the far wall. Each step was carved from seasoned oak, its surface worn smooth by countless ascents and descents. The lamplighter ran a rough palm along the curved edge of the third step from the top, feeling the shallow grooves left by his own hands over months of work. Carefully he lifted the bundle of steps as one unit, their combined weight solid and reassuring in his arms. He stepped forward, pivoted, and nestled them against the exposed brick beside the workshop door. The bricks themselves held a slow warmth from the lingering daylight, and their rough texture pressed gently into the wood. He arranged the steps in ascending order of height, each slightly taller than the next, so that when the time came he could select the proper ladder without pause. A soft scrape echoed as the final step settled into place, and he straightened, his eyes scanning the neat alignment. From beneath the workbench he retrieved a length of leather belt, studded with small iron loops and attachments. To these he would fasten his portable lanterns, each one a self-contained source of light for the darkest corners of town. He uncoiled the belt and held it up to the dim glow filtering through the shutter cracks. The leather, once shiny, had dulled to the tawny shade of well-worn boots. He flexed it gently, listening for the slight creak that signified both age and resilience. One by one he selected half a dozen small lanterns from the shelf above. Each lantern was fashioned of brass frames and square panes of glass, its base housing a diminutive burner and wick. He inspected the glass for hairline cracks, tapping lightly to test for integrity. Satisfied, he hooked each lantern onto a loop, ensuring it hung at an even height when the belt was buckled. The weight was modest but definite, a promise of light to be dispensed along shadowed streets and forgotten courtyards. Next came the largest lamp in his care, the ornate fixture destined for the central square's grand post by the old chapel. This lamp demanded special attention. Its reservoir was capacious, its glass housing larger sheets of polished crystal. He placed a stout cloth beneath the reservoir to catch any errant drops as he refilled it. The lamplighter lifted the slender spout of the polished brass oil canister, its surface worn to a gentle patina. He inserted the spout into the lamp's filling hole, his hand steady despite the fine tremor of anticipation. A dull trickle began as the last of the refined kerosene slipped into the bowl. The liquid pooled like clear amber, reflecting ghosted echoes of the workshop's tools. He watched until the reservoir brimmed to the marked line, then withdrew the spout and set the oil can aside with a soft thud. A single drop clung to the spout's tip. He caught it on a rag and returned the can to its place, closing the lid until its next demand. With the larger lamp replenished, he turned to a row of smaller oil flasks, each sealed with a neatly corked stopper. These would reserve enough fuel for emergencies, unexpected drizzles or lamps that sputtered prematurely. He lifted one flask, its slender neck enclosed by tightly wound twine to secure the cork. He pressed his thumb to the glass, feeling the cool hardness under his fingertip, and noted how the oil inside refracted the waning daylight into soft, golden hues. He tucked these extras into a small satchel slung over his shoulder, alongside a few lengths of spare wick and a folded strip of linen for polishing glass. The contents rattled softly, a quiet percussion that reminded him of a distant train's steady chug. Each item had its purpose, each would serve him when city streets grew too dark for sight alone. All preparations complete, the lamplighter paused by the workshop window to gaze upon the sky. The horizon was painted in strokes of salmon and rose, the church spires silhouetted against the glowing wash. A handful of early stars winked through thinning clouds, as though curious to see their realm below glow in turn. He allowed himself a moment's reverie, inhaling the mixture of kerosene residue and cool dusk air, and feeling an ineffable pride in his silent stewardship of the town's illumination. In the gathering gloom, even the smallest lamp held significance. A flame to guide the stray traveler, a beacon for night watchmen, a comfortable hush for those who lingered in alleyways. Each glow was a tether between the ordinary world and the mysteries that lurked in shadow. Turning back inside, he checked his belt's fit, drawing it snug across his waist and over his sturdy wool coat. The lanterns swung in gentle arcs, catching glints of dying light at their hinges. He tested each latch, ensuring that neither lantern would slip free when scaled aloft on a ladder or when buffeted by a sudden breeze. Holding the belt before a small mirror propped on the workbench, he watched the lantern's silhouettes bend and sway, as though ready to dance into life. Then, with one final adjustment of strap and buckle, he nodded to himself, a silent affirmation that all was in readiness. He lifted the first wooden step, feeling the smooth curve of its top edge against his palm, and placed it under his arm. In his other hand he took up the larger lamp, cradling its weight close to his chest. The lamp's glass gleamed faintly, as though it contained a slumbering star waiting to be roused. With measured steps, he approached the open doorway, where the last sliver of daylight clung to the threshold. His boots rose and fell on the worn flagstones, the echoes sounding both like a herald and a prayer. Outside, the cool hush of evening welcomed him, and the promise of countless lamps yet to ignite lay ahead. This moment, between day's end and the first strike of a match, was his domain, poised on the edge of darkness but filled with the certainty of light. And so, ladder in hand and lanterns at his side, he stepped into the salmon-tinted twilight, ready to kindle the town's quiet heartbeat once more. The sky had slipped into a violet hush by the time he hoisted the last of his ladders onto his shoulder and stepped from the shelter of the elm grove. The heat of the day had drained from the paving stones, and an almost imperceptible chill crept along his collar. He paused to smooth the worn leather straps of his satchel, nestling the spare wicks and snuffers that still rattled softly within. In his other hand he carried a small oil-soaked cloth, its edges singed from countless fires past. Every instrument of his craft, each brass burner, spanner and corked vial, had been arranged in deliberate order this afternoon, as the waning light coaxed him back toward the streets that lay waiting. He moved off in measured steps. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the chimneys overhead, carrying with it the faint scent of burning peat. A distant dog's bark echoed down an empty lane. This was the hour when the world seemed to inhale in quiet anticipation, poised between day's demands and night's soft dominion. The first lamp he sought crouched at the corner of Rose and Parchment Alley, its glass panels dulled by the day's dust. He set his ladder against the cold iron post, fingertips brushing away a few stubborn cobwebs before finding a firm purchase on the rungs. Up he climbed, step by careful step, until the lamp's brass collar gleamed at eye level. Below him, the cobblestones had lost their midday hardness, now they slumbered in shadow. He unhooked a tiny key from his belt and eased open the globe's latch. The wick, trimmed this afternoon to an inch's perfect length, lay poised against the gas jet, ready to draw breath. He drew the match carefully from its tin compartment, struck it and held the flame to the tapering tip. There came the softest of hisses, as though the lamp itself exhaled after a long day's rest, and then a pale blue flicker blossomed into a steady glow. Heat blossomed against his cheek as he leaned in to steady the minute flame. It waxed and settled. With the gentlest turn of a small screw, he guided its height so that the light would neither spurt and flare nor dip into a hungry smoke. At that moment the alley shifted shape beneath him. The tall masonry walls, once featureless in the dusk, now glittered with amber radiance. Shadows that had pooled in the corners retreated like water from stone, spilling back into quiet anonymity. He allowed himself the smallest smile and murmured the ancient rhyme his father had taught him long ago for steadiness of hand and safety of flame. Light be true and steady burn, guide the way for all to turn. Whether from habit or superstition, the syllables steadied his pulse. He closed the globe's door and tested its latch. Then, with careful balance, descended and shouldered the ladder once more. The second lamp waited at the mouth of Cumberland Street. A shopkeeper was pulling down a chained gate, her motions slow, deliberate, perhaps caught by the sudden glow at her threshold. He nodded, and she offered a faint curtsy in return, the scarlet kerchief at her throat catching the lantern's sheen. He set his ladder against the post, and this time as he climbed, he felt the distant flutter of bats rising from the roof's eaves. Their wings beat like dark flags against the sky. This lamp's valve proved stubborn. He had not quite anticipated the stiff resistance of the metal after weeks without movement. With a quick motion he withdrew a dropper of turpentine and anointed the joint, then worked it free once more. A few twists, a soft click, and the valve yielded. He shaded the match with his coat sleeve, felt the flame breathe in the night air, and repeated the rhyme with a barely audible whisper. The glow shivered outward, illuminating the ornate ironwork of the post and casting the woman's face in a gentle, forgiving light. By the time he reached the third lamp, just beyond the old tannery where the river's mist rose in faint, shifting plumes, his lamplight cast long fingers across the damp stone. He rested the ladder against the post and paused to tuck his loose shawl more snugly around his shoulders. Little rivulets of river water gleamed like silver threads in the half-dark. The wick seemed reluctant at first, flickering with a small cough, before it steadied into a modest, contented burn. He listened for the hiss and felt the tiny pulse of warmth in his hands. He climbed down with the somber satisfaction of a craftsman who knew his fire would stand until the night drew its final breath. As he shouldered the ladder once more, he realized that these first lamps were always the most satisfying to ignite. They banished the final dregs of twilight's uncertainty and marked the beginning of his silent vigil. A steady procession of 5 more lamps lay before him before he could claim the broad plaza of the marketplace. As he wound his way from post to post, he noted the hollowed forms of shuttered windows, the rustle of curtains as frightened cats scuttled for safe harbor, and the distant toll of the church bell marking the hour. With each match struck, each valve turned, he spoke that quiet charm. The old rhyme seemed to echo off each wall, more a pulse than a prayer, syncing his own heartbeat with the lit lanterns that now studded the streets like gentle stars fallen to earth. Sometimes he paused in the middle of a turning, sometimes he tugged at a stray leaf caught beneath a mount, or brushed away a wisp of soot that threatened the glass's clarity. Every little detail, he reminded himself, would repay his attention tenfold over the course of the night. For every lamp lit was a beacon to a weary traveler, a guide to a wayward child, or a comfort to a soul waiting within the warmth of a home. When he finally perceived the first edges of the great square, the central fountain lay cloaked in the dusk's last sighs. He approached the grand lamp post, a towering column of wrought iron crowned with a glass globe almost as large as his head. He set his ladder against its broad base and climbed into the glow that awaited him. Here he paused longer than at any other, not from trouble with the mechanism but from the simple beauty of what his work would become. From this height, the lamplit plaza stretched below him like an ink and gold tapestry, every edge softened, every shadow calmed. With reverent fingers he unlatched the globe. The wick, trimmed so precisely that it shimmered at the tip, waited with eager patience. He struck the match, brought flame and gas together, and as the lamp bloomed fully to life, he closed the globe, sealing it against the evening breeze. He let the ladder slip almost soundlessly to the cobbles, then clasped his hands behind his back. The square, once hesitant in the gathering night, now stood proud and luminous, as if his single act had coaxed its heart into a steady rhythm. He gazed upward for a moment longer, committing the scene to memory, how the light hugged the number-engraved fountain, how each building's cornice caught a tender gleam. Then, with a last satisfied nod, he gathered his ladder and tools and turned his steps toward the silent streets beyond, ready to continue the vigil until his entire route lay bright and sure beneath the mantle of night. The sky above the marketplace had deepened into a muted indigo by the time he arrived, and the last slivers of daylight slipped behind the ridge of terracotta rooftops. The air carried a faint, lingering warmth from the afternoon sun, now fading, yet it was already beginning to cool around his shoulders. In the gathering dusk, the market square lay half in shadow, half in soft lamplight cast by the smaller lanterns he had already kindled along the perimeter stalls. Empty wooden crates and overturned barrels creaked quietly under the hush that fell as merchants began to pack their goods away. Here, at the heart of the square, stood the grand lamp above the fountain, tall, ornate, wrought iron embellished with spirals and crowned by a cruciform finial. It was this lamp, more than any other, that defined the marketplace after dark, and it was to this centerpiece that his footsteps now carried him, each measured on the uneven cobbles worn smooth by countless hooves and saws. He set his oil can and ladder against the fountain's stone rim, feeling the familiar yield of the carved marble beneath his palm. The soft burble of water echoed from the basin, catching the last ambient glimmer of daylight and sending a tremulous pattern of light dancing across nearby walls. He paused to take it in, a moment of stillness before resuming his careful work. Around him, shutters clattered shut and doors creaked on iron hinges as shopkeepers closed their shops for the night. A stray breeze gusted through the square, stirring fallen straw and carrying the scent of wax, oil, and the faint, heady sweetness of crushed fruit. He unfolded the ladder, its rungs clicking into place, and angled it firmly against the lamp post. Each rung was worn by time, the wood smooth from many evenings of use, and he tested its stability with a practiced foot. Above him, the lamp's polished brass base gleamed dully in the gathering half-light, its glass panel streaked with dust, soot, and the fingerprint smudges of curious passers-by. He tapped the lower bracket with a spanner, a gentle reminder of his presence, and then, summoning steady strength, began his ascent. Each step carried him nearer to the reservoir of gas concealed within the lamp's body, the thin, steady supply that, when coaxed to flame, would banish the shadows at the square's center. At the topmost rung, he reached out to cradle the lamp housing in one hand, careful to avoid the still cool metal of the glass frame. In his other hand he carried a small matchbox and a length of spare wick, neatly trimmed earlier that day. He examined the wick as he had done so many times before, ensuring its tip was neither too long, risking a smoky glare, nor too short, yielding a feeble glow. Satisfied, he secured it in the burner, opened the gas valve with a slow, precise twist and struck his match. The sulfur tip flared to life. With a practiced movement, he held the match to the wick, listening for the soft, reassuring hiss as the gas met flame. For a heartbeat, nothing stirred, and then a warm amber glow blossomed within the glass panels. He lowered the match, extinguishing it against an oil-soaked rag he carried in his coat pocket, then set it aside. Lifted by the lantern's frame, he began to polish each pane of glass in turn. His cloth was clean and lint-free, the fibers chosen to prevent streaks. Across each panel he moved the rag in gentle, circular strokes. He lingered over smudges that obscured the brilliance of the flame, observing how the light refracted through polished surfaces and cast prismatic highlights on the fountain's curling edges. Dust and soot yielded to his patience. A whisper of cloth against glass, the soft rustle of his coat sleeves, and the progression from blurred gloom to crystalline luminosity. As he worked, he listened to the fountain's water ripple below, as though the square itself sighed in relief to see its lamp restored. Once the panels shone, he paused again to inspect the burner assembly for stray drafts. With one hand he shielded the flame, leaning his body to block any stray breeze, while his other hand hovered near the seams of the lamp housing. He felt for the slightest rush of air. A hairline gap beneath the bracket invited a faint chill. He seized a strip of sealing material he had tucked into his satchel that morning, pressing it gently into place. Then he tested the valve's collar and tightened a loose screw with his spanner, ensuring a snug fit that would keep the flame stable through the cool of the night. Small tasks, perhaps, but each one was a reassurance that the light would not falter before his next round. Below, the square had grown stiller. The glow from every edge of the lamp fell in broad lobes upon worn stone, pushing back the hem of dusk and revealing the fountain's carved dolphins and shell motifs in steady clarity. It was then he heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, as a lone fruit vendor stepped forward from behind her shuttered stall. She paused at the rim of the fountain, her figure outlined by the lamp's warm halo. In her apron pocket was a folded cloth she used to wrap the last of her apples and pears for the night. She offered a gentle nod in his direction, and he returned her greeting with a thin smile. "Thank you, sir," she said in a voice hushed by habit, and nodded with tired gratitude. "My stand looks proper now that I can see the colors of my harvest once more." He inclined his head. "Your stall will welcome the early customers," he replied. "Tomorrow's dawn will find you ready." She reached into her apron and pulled out a single ripe plum, its skin deep purple and gently mottled. "Here," she said. "For your trouble." He accepted the fruit with a polite bow. Its surface was cool and slick beneath his fingers, a quiet testament to autumn's onset. The fragrance was delicate, sour-sweet with a hint of earth, and for a moment he pressed it to his nose before tucking it into his coat pocket, where it would rest until his next break. Their eyes met for a fleeting instant, and she turned back to her stall, closing the final latch with a muted click. Alone again beneath the grand lamp, he gathered his tools with methodical care. Ladder, spanner, sealing strips, spare wick, rag, matchbox, all went back into their prescribed places. He checked the oil level in his canister with a tilt and listened for the slosh of liquid against metal, content that he had enough fuel for the remainder of his evening. Then, stepping back, he took in his handiwork, the lamp's unbroken pillars of light, the way they stretched over the square like quiet sentinels. In that glow, he saw the promise of safe passage for any late traveler, the comfort of clarity over shadow. He set his ladder upright and, pausing to catch his breath, ran a final glance over the realm he had tended. Beyond the fountain lay the narrower lanes that waited still in darkness. Their lamp posts stood as silent calls for his attention, row upon row of unlit globes and dormant burners. He felt no urgency but rather a calm resolve. The marketplace was secure, he had brought its heart ablaze. Now, with the grand lamp assured, he would move on to the night watch under the stars, trusting the light here to remain steadfast until dawn's first hesitant glow returned. With that, he lifted his satchel and walked from the square, the steady radiance of the grand lamp at his back marking his path into the darker quarters of the town. And so, having bathed the marketplace in gentle, unwavering light, he prepared to begin the next leg of his solitary journey, a journey where every lamp, like the one above the fountain, awaited his careful, deliberate touch. A hush fell over the town as I stepped from the warm glow of the marketplace into the deeper shadows of the streets beyond. The taper of light at my belt cast flickering circles on the cobblestones, and I paused for a moment in the lingering hush. The lantern I had just kindled above the fountain still held a steady gleam, but there were no merchants left to admire it, no lingering customers pressing past one another beneath its brightness. Now the square was mine alone, and I listened to the distant echo of my own footsteps before pressing on. I moved cautiously into the narrower lanes, where the clustered houses nearly met overhead, and only the faintest sliver of sky was visible between their steep roofs. Each lamp I had lit earlier seemed to stand sentinel over its own little domain of darkness, and as I passed, I made a habit of pausing to peer inside every glass globe. A few flickered unevenly, their wicks gasping in the gentle breeze that drifted through the alley. Jotting down their posts in my leather-bound notebook would be enough for tomorrow's repairs. For now, I gave each one a gentle nudge with my elbow, listening for the reassuring hiss of gas and the sound of flame catching. A sudden rustle drew my attention to the far end of a narrow passage. There, half hidden beneath the spreading boughs of an ancient oak, hung a lamp whose globe rose and fell with the slightest sway. The tree's knotted trunk leaned against the brick wall of a long-abandoned warehouse, its dry leaves whispering in the night air. I lowered the lantern at my side so that its pale light would highlight the motion above me. The lamp's globe had come loose from its bracket, and when the wind caught it, it peppered drops of oil onto the stones below. I knelt to examine the bracket's collar and discovered the tiny screw holding it in place had given way. With my hand, I steadied the globe and, in the glow of my pocket lamp, twisted the bracket back into alignment. Then I opened my satchel, retrieved a spare screw from a small leather pouch and tightened it by feel. Only when the globe hung motionless and the flame inside burned with a contented, unwavering glow did I rise again, a reassuring click echoing under the oak boughs. From my vantage beneath those ancient limbs, I looked skyward. The canopy of leaves framed a scatter of bright stars, and I remembered how, as a boy, I would press my back against that very trunk and watch the heavens. Tonight, the oak remembered me as well, or so it felt in the quiet of the moment. A distant hoot broke the solitude and I smiled softly. Owls were the true night watchmen, calling quietly from tower and rafters, unseen except for the occasional flash of pale eyes in the dark. I moved on, retracing my steps back into another narrow corridor of houses, where the lamplight dwindled to a slim rod of brightness across the stones. Someone stirred in the gloom, an uncertain, shifting presence that caught the edge of my sight. My heart quickened, though my pace remained steady. A figure emerged from the shadow of a doorway. He was tall and clad in a long traveling cloak, which looked mismatched and threadbare at the hems. His boots bore mud from the outskirts, and in one hand he carried a battered satchel. He paused when he saw my lantern. "Pardon me, sir," he said, his voice low and uncertain. "I fear I have lost my way. I sought the inn by the river, but the roads here all look the same in the dark." I inclined my head and held out the lamp so its glow would fall between us. "You are not far," I told him. "If you follow this lane until you see a low wall of limestone blocks, then turn left at the lamp post with the chipped globe. The Inn of the Silver Swan stands just beyond. I can show you the way if you like." By the lamplight, I could see relief ease across his face. He nodded gratefully and I beckoned him to walk beside me. As we moved through the dark corridor, I pointed out each lamp post's distinguishing mark, the carved capital on one, the slight lean on another, and he repeated them as though each detail meant a new promise of finding his destination. It warmed me to imagine him retracing our steps after I had left, the soft lamps guiding him like old companions. When we reached the chipped globe a few minutes later, I paused beside it and tapped the iron post thoughtfully. The globe had a fine crack spiraling from its base. The flame inside winked once and then steadied. "That one will need a small patch," I said. "I will come by tomorrow with a bit of tar to seal that crack. Until then the glass will hold, but its warmth is less certain in a strong wind." He looked up as my lamp caught the crack from the inside. "Thank you," he murmured. "You have saved me from wandering these alleys all night." I shook my head. "The lamps are meant to guide all who pass beneath them. Good fortune to you, traveler." He tipped his hat and set off, and I watched as he rounded the corner toward the distant glow of the inn. Once he had passed, I turned inward again, deeper into the darkness. A hush settled back over the street, and I was alone once more with the whisper of leaves overhead and the gentle hiss of my own lantern. My patrol continued in careful stages. At each lamp post, I checked the height of the flame, made sure no spiders had spun nests across the vents, and listened for any signs of gas escaping where it should not. A few more lamps wavered in the slack breeze and I shored them up one by one. In the old quarter, where the houses leaned close together and the wind funneled through narrow gaps, flames had a restless habit of bowing and flickering. I cupped my hands around these fragile lights, sheltering them for a moment until they stood upright once more. With each correctable fault, I made mental notes for later. There was the lamp with a slightly corroded valve, the one whose bracket needed tightening, and the pair that would benefit from fresh wicks before the next time I set out. Tomorrow's tasks lay like small promises pinned to each post, waiting for the touch of dawn. By the edge of the deserted market stalls I paused again. Nothing moved but the shadows of awnings swaying above empty tables. My lantern was almost spent, its oil tank running low. I timed my walk so that I returned to the workshop before the light fails completely, but the mile or so that remained would pass under the lamps I had lit this evening. The flame at my belt cast long, soft-edged shadows that danced behind me as I walked. The night was heavy with stillness and I found pleasure in it. The world felt leveled, reduced to lamp and stone and leaf. There was no haste, no clamor of voices or clinking of dishes, only the caretaking of each small flame against the vast dark. In this solitude I was both humble and at ease, for I knew that these lights I tended were not my own but gifts to every passerby, to travelers like the man I had guided, to baker's boys trundling home, to those who rested behind closed shutters, perhaps dreaming. At last I crossed beneath the double archway leading back toward the lamp shop. The street lamps here stood close together, their combined glow softening the darkness to a pale indigo. I lit my pipe with the last loyalty of my lantern's flame, drawing the ember into a steady glow before slipping it back into my coat pocket. Even amid rows of standing lights, there was comfort in one's own small flame, a reminder of quiet continuity. A single step brought me to my workshop door and I paused in the lamplight. All around me, every lamp post in the town was lit, each flame tended and protected against the night. I felt a surge of contentment, my work for this night complete, but part of a cycle that would begin afresh at dawn. In the silence, I whispered a private blessing for each tiny fire nestled in its glass home. The night watch had passed well, guided by the gentle pulse of flickering light beneath a canopy of stars. The night had settled into its deepest hours, the sky over the town a velvet canopy studded with distant pinpricks of light. From the narrow alleyway beneath an ancient oak, the lamplighter observed the gentle sway of the lanterns he had just set alight. Their warm glows formed a chain of soft beacons, guiding his solitary footsteps as he moved from lamppost to lamppost. A low wind stirred, searching the corners of the street for any spark to snuff out. He paused for a moment under the oak's gnarled branches, inhaling the damp scent of earth and wood, and allowed himself a silent prayer to keep each flame steady against the chill night air. He had completed the main square and several of the side streets, yet a handful of lamps in a narrower lane still awaited his careful attention. Pulling his coat tighter about his shoulders, he lifted his lantern from the belt at his hip, the small light almost entirely swallowed by the gloom beyond the circle of flame. Each step on the cobbles sounded muffled in the night, his leather-soled boots pressing softly against the wave of cold that pooled between the stones. A faint hiss in the distance reminded him of the great wrought iron lamp at the market. It had required minor adjustment this evening, but now its flame shone steadfast, a testament to his steady hand. As he turned a corner, a sudden squall rushed down the narrow passage. The gust hammered against the lantern above his head, forcing it to shimmy on its bracket. Instantly alert, he reached up with one hand, the other cradling his own portable light. The wind tore through the dark, tousling the flame inside the globe until it flared and sputtered, sending anxious tongues of light flickering through the smoky glass. A harsher gust snapped the lantern sideways as if daring him to catch it. Before panic could seize him, he lunged forward, clutching the lamp post with one arm and bracing his foot against the base to steady the wood. His fingers brushed the cold metal bracket, turning it swiftly to face the wind's assault. He leaned his body against the post, partially shielding the flame with the fullness of his worn coat sleeve. The fabric flew outward like a pennant in the blast, yet he held it firm over the glass, forming a crude windbreak. The flickering flame calmed to a gentle pulse. His heart pounded beneath his ribcage not only from the rush of exertion, but from the sudden reminder of how fragile each burning wick could be. If it went out here, in this twisting alley, a whole stretch of pathway would be plunged into darkness until dawn. He glanced back toward the wider street, aware that the cooling air carried no chance of calm until the wind dropped. With measured care he loosened his hand from the glass sphere and drew from his satchel a small metal rod, his improvised tool for minor repairs. The lantern's glass panels were streaked with moisture, and the wind had worked a small seam at the back of the bracket loose. Even a sliver of movement at the base allowed drafts to seep in, tugging at the flame. He tucked the rod between two spokes of the frame and gently lifted the glass away from the holder, brushing aside drifting strands of cobweb and a few crumbled moth wings that clung to the soot-stained surface. In the half-light of his own lamp, he spotted the real culprit. The wick holder, the small brass jaw that gripped the end of the wick, had bent slightly under the force of the gale. One tiny tooth had twisted, and the wick lay at an uneven angle, leaving part of it exposed to the draft. He whispered a soft curse, more from habit than frustration, and approached the repair with the calm precision of countless evenings before. Settling the lamp on a broad stone ledge beside the post, he unscrewed the lower collar that secured the burner assembly. Oil dripped in a thin thread onto the cold stone. He caught the stray droplet on the cloth at his waist, careful not to allow any waste. Retracting a small wrench, he eased the bracket aside and freed the broken wick holder. Its brass prongs gleamed dully in the lantern's glow. Using tiny pliers, he straightened the bent tooth with slow, deliberate motions, mindful that too much force would snap the metal clean off. The night pressed in around him. A few wagons rattled past in the distance, their iron wheels chanting a lonely hymn, and the creak of a shutter echoed along the rooftops. Still, he worked without haste, aware that each deliberate twist or millimeter of adjustment could make the difference between a stubborn glow and a feeble sputter. Once the prong lay restored to its original line, he seated the wick carefully in the holder. The frayed end came into view, damp and uneven after being battered by wind and cold. Drawing his small shears, he trimmed away the charred fringe, sliding the blade along the wick until its tip shone a uniform white. Gently, he placed the burner assembly back into the lamp housing, tightening the brass collar until it sat snug. He blew across the wick, clearing away any stray soot particles, and opened the valve at the lamp's base. A sigh of gas followed, and he brought his match close, shielding it with two cupped hands. The flame caught with a soft hiss, climbing the wick's edge in a perfect column. He stood back, brushing soot and oil from his coat sleeve, and gave the lantern a cautious shake. The glass remained clear, the flame steady against the pull of the night breeze. Satisfaction warmed his chest as he replaced the lantern on its bracket and secured it with a final twist of the wrench. The lamp shone as brightly as any in the town's main streets, its light an act of defiance against the gloom that pressed in from every side. For a long moment he remained beneath the oak, gazing at the row of gentle glows that traced the lane's path. He felt the first taste of triumph. This obstacle, sudden and fierce, had not broken his routine or broken his spirit. Each lamp, he reminded himself, was a promise of safety to any traveler who might pass this way. With a silent nod, he gathered his tools, buckled his satchel of spare wicks and oil, and moved on. The wind, having vented its wrath, dwindled to a cursive whisper across the rooftops, but the lamplighter carried no fear of its return. Ahead lay the outer district, the last stretch before home. He must now venture across narrow courtyard entrances and beneath low-lying eaves, where shadows pooled like ink. Yet if one lamp could survive a gale, then each of the remaining few would stand its ground too. He breathed deeply of the cool air, tasting the faint metallic tang of oil and the earthy promise of dawn still distant on the horizon. In the hush that followed his repair, he heard the steady rhythm of his own pulse, and felt, in even measure, the quiet pride of a craft well practiced. Thus, under starlight and the soft sway of street lamps, he continued his journey. Though unexpected obstacles had tested both his skill and patience, he remained unmoved, a solitary guardian of light against the encroaching dark. And with each step, he drew himself nearer to the familiar lantern-lit threshold of the lamp shop, where the final pages of tonight's labors would be written in soot, ink, and the gentle glow of 1,000 tiny flames. He stepped beyond the last row of cobblestones, leaving behind the faint hum of the village proper, and entered the outer districts under a vault of starlight. The night was hushed, a gentle quilt of darkness embroidered with distant pinpricks of silver. In this part of town, few souls wandered. The houses were spaced wider, their gardens overgrown with wild grasses and tangled hedgerows. Every footfall echoed in the quiet as he pressed on, ladder in one hand, oil can and trimmed wick holder secured to his belt. The weight of the day tugged at his shoulders, but he welcomed it. This final stretch always brought a curious peace, a chance to witness his handiwork in its most secluded setting. Ahead, a narrow lane veered left, shaded by linden trees whose leaves whispered in a soft night breeze. He paused beneath their boughs and raised a small lantern from his belt. Its glass panels, freshly polished, cast a gentle glow onto the rough-hewn timber fence. He inspected the wick one last time, trimmed to the precise height that ensured an even, steady flame. The lamp's brass valve gleamed faintly as he tested its thread, confirming the perfect seal. With a measured twist, he opened the valve and a pale blue flame blossomed, catching the lantern's reflector and sending delicate, dancing shadows across the wood. The glow illuminated a narrow clearing beyond the hedges, where a cast-iron lamp post stood sentinel. It was one of the oldest fixtures in his charge, its base mottled with age, flaking paint, and the faintest traces of rust. He set his ladder against it, each rung worn smooth by countless past climbs. The ladder's top rested against the lamp's metal body, and he ascended slowly, one careful step at a time. From this vantage, the village lay behind him like a tapestry. Rows of luminous globes lined the main street, their warm radiance pulsing gently in the distance. At the lantern's crown, he loosened the globe's catch, lowering its glass sphere into his waiting hands. He traced each seam of the globe, removing specks of dust, bits of dried cobwebs, and the occasional moth that had ventured inside in search of warmth. He polished the globe in gentle circles, his cloth whispering against the glass until it shone as if new. The night air was cool against his face, carrying the scent of dewy grass and the faint sweetness of wildflowers spilling from untended yards. Somewhere beyond the hedgerow, An owl's solitary hoot drifted across the fields. Replacing the globe and securing its clasps, he refilled the brass reservoir with fresh oil from a small flask nestled in his pouch. The oil was pale gold in the lantern's light, smooth and viscous as it slipped into place. He lifted the wick holder, slid the trimmed wick into the burner and tightened the fitting. A flicker of anticipation rose in him. This was the moment the lamp would awaken, banishing the blackness around it. With a practiced motion, he struck a match and, shielding the tiny flame with cupped hands, tilted it to the gas jet. A soft hiss followed, and the wick glowed at once, unveiling the lamp's fuller potential. He lingered a moment, watching the flame steady itself. It burned clean and bright, its slender silhouette swaying ever so slightly in the breeze. The lamp post stood firm, a beacon for the few late travelers who might pass along this lonely road. He noted the time, 9:30 in the ledger tucked inside his satchel, and marked the entry with a quick flourish. The page carried the ink stains and pencil smudges of many nights like this, each line a testament to the hours spent bringing light to darkness. Descending the ladder, he closed the gas valve gently, ensuring no drips of oil would escape to foul the ground below. He wiped his hands on a rag, then moved on, guided by the lamp's glow as if it were a star fallen to earth. The pathway beyond sloped downward, flanked by brambles and cow parsley that rustled when brushed. He carried a small brush in his pocket, used for clearing the glass of stray leaves or insects that sometimes clung to the lamp housing. Here, though, the glass was pristine, swept clean by the night air alone. In the scattered light, he spotted another post half hidden beneath a dense hawthorn hedge. This lamp had escaped his earlier rounds, tucked away like a secret. He approached it with the same deliberate care, setting up the ladder, polishing the globe, trimming the wick, and filling the reservoir. The hush was complete, even the breeze seemed deferential, holding its breath until the lamp caught flame. When it did, a gentle radiance bloomed outward, unveiling a small patch of scrubland and a low stone wall beyond. Beneath that wall, the land fell away into gentle, sloping pastures, their borders faintly visible against the starlit sky. He paused to admire the silhouette of distant hills, their contours etched against a backdrop of silver-gray clouds drifting across the moon. He felt a quiet satisfaction wash over him. These lamps in the outskirts rarely received attention from passing townsfolk, but he knew their importance nonetheless. Even here, the flame marked a promise of safety, a guide to those who traveled at odd hours and a small defiance of gloom. His blue coat sleeves were damp with dew from brushing against the hedges, and he could smell the earthy musk of the soil. The night had grown colder, and he tightened his scarf against a sudden chill. Yet each lamp he lit seemed to warm him in turn, a discreet reminder of the day's purpose fulfilled. He consulted his route map, now folded once more and placed back in its leather satchel. Only 2 lamps remained before he could make the return journey. The map's corners were frayed, its lines faint from countless references in the dim glow of his lantern. He advanced to the second-to-last post, stepping carefully over bramble roots that emerged like gnarled fingers from the ground. The lamp's fixture was newer, its globe still fresh, but the valve required a slight adjustment. He could hear the oil surging as he opened it, a steady trickle that promised a strong, unwavering flame. After cleaning the glass and fitting the wick, he struck another match. The lamp erupted in a pure, steady light that cast a comforting glow on the nearby footpath. He watched the flame for a heartbeat, ensuring it would not sputter or wink out. Only 1 lamp remained. Beyond it lay the edge of the cultivated fields, where the wild grasses surrendered to tidy furrows of rye and barley. He approached the final post with a mingled sense of relief and quiet triumph. Here, the lantern housing was mounted on a stone pillar, its metal framework entwined with creeping ivy. The ivy's tendrils had reached across the glass, leaving their subtle impressions on the surface. He removed the lattice and carefully unwound the vines, brushing aside leaves that might smolder if left near the flame. Once freed, the lamp was transformed. He polished the glass until it reflected the starlight like a mirror, then fitted the wick and reservoir with the same exactitude he had employed since dawn. As he struck his last match and the lamp ignited in a steady, golden glow, the design of the district revealed itself anew. The light traced the hedgerows, illuminated the field gates, and revealed the contours of the distant hills once more. For a moment, he stood back and watched his path of illumination arc behind him like a string of fallen stars guiding the night. He closed the gas valve, confirming the perfect seal, and tucked away his tools. The night air felt less cold now that every lamp in this outer reach was aglow. With the final job complete, he gathered his ladder and lantern, slinging them over his shoulder. His boots crunched on pebbles as he commenced the slow walk back toward the village, his route marked by the steady flicker of lamps in retreat. Each light stood as a testament to his care, a beacon that would burn until the dawn returned. The outskirts lay quiet once more, but the path was no longer shrouded in darkness. He followed the thread of his own work, retracing the steps that would lead him to the familiar lamps of the town square. Ahead, the silhouette of the village emerged, a ribbon of soft light winding its way through the sleeping streets. In the calm of the night, with only his breathing and the faint hiss of distant lamps for company, he made his way home. The final lamps in the outer districts burned steadily behind him, their glow a silent salute to the lamplighter who had brought them to life. The lamplighter paused for a moment beneath the gentle glow of the last lamp he had lit in the outer district, a humble iron post topped with a globe of smoky glass, through which a warm, steady flame pulsed like a heartbeat. Around him stretched the quiet lanes, neat rows of cobbled stones shimmering faintly under the light, as though each surface had soaked in the day's warmth and now exhaled it in a mottled pattern of silver and slate. He straightened his back, pressing both hands to his aching shoulders, and felt a quiet pride settle in his chest. This simple act of illumination, repeated one lamp at a time, had transformed the dusk-wrapped streets into a soft panorama of safety and calm. He lifted his leather satchel, the one in which he carried spare wicks, a small tin of lamp oil and his ink-stained route map, higher on his shoulder and began the tread back toward the village center. Already, the lights before him marched in orderly succession, guiding his footsteps like a river of gentle fire. Each lamp he passed recalled an afternoon spent in careful trimming, an evening venture battling wind, or a hurried repair on a drafty corner porch. In his mind's eye, he traced the steps from chapter to chapter of his day, the first delicate spark at dawn, the midday respite by a hearth, the final wind-whipped struggle in the alleys beyond the wall. He savored the hush that accompanied these lantern-lit lanes. The wind was still, allowing nary a tremor to disturb the lamplight. An occasional window shutter rattled, a reminder that somewhere inside, a family lingered in the last hour of supper, or a solitary scholar bent over a flickering candle. A distant dog barked once, and then all was quiet again, as if the village itself listened for the next measured toll of the church bell. He noted with satisfaction that every lamp along his path glowed as it should, no drooping wicks, no shallow fuel. A tight, pleased smile touched his lips. He walked on, stepping over a small puddle that still held the reflected lanterns like a pool of stars. The damp air carried the cool scent of earth and oil in equal measure. As he drew closer to the main street, the lamps overhead grew more numerous and more familiar. The grand lamp above the fountain, the pair of twin posts before the inn, the smaller wall-mounted brackets flanking each tavern door. Here, the lamplighter's work felt almost ceremonial, as though each flame was an offering to the town's well-being. He considered how his hands, now stained the pale gold of fresh kerosene, had coaxed these lights into being, how each twist of the nozzle and gentle strike of the match had been a small miracle. At the bend in the road, he glanced up at the church spire, its silhouette dark against the starlit sky. Moments later, the bell tolled 10 times, its sonorous clang rolling over rooftops and farmlands. 10 strokes, measured and unhurried, marking the hour and guiding his return. The lamplighter paused beneath the nearest lamp and lifted his gaze, watching the slow descent of the last toll. With each chime, he tapped his cane softly against the cobblestones in time, feeling an echo of the church's music beneath his feet. Once the bell's last note faded, he resumed his journey, crossing the threshold into the core of the village. Here, the lamps shone most brightly, tall gas mantles casting broad, symmetrical pools of light that banished gloom from every doorway. The tavern's windows glowed amber, and through the glass, he glimpsed silhouettes of patrons raising glasses in low conversation. Smoke drifted from a bakehouse chimney, curling upward until it disappeared into the night. A lantern at the smithy's door flickered briefly on a draft, then steadied as if the smith himself had just pocketed his tools for the evening. A gentle breeze stirred, carrying a hint of lavender from the window boxes he had noticed that afternoon. He recalled a little girl's shy smile when he paused to admire her father's floral offerings, and the way her mother waved at him as he continued on his rounds. Those small moments, he realized, were as vital to his work as the oil and the wicks. They were reminders that the lamps he tended were not mere fixtures. They were beacons of comfort and reassurance for the people he served. Soon he stood before his own lamp workshop, its wooden sign creaking slightly in the breeze. Through the open window, the soft glow of his own handiwork bathed the small room in a golden haze. He could see the outline of his workbench, faint shadows cast by the lanterns he had lit earlier, shelves lined with glass globes, brass burner nozzles neatly arranged, leather pouches bulging with spare spindles and screws. The sight filled him with a gentle relief. Here at last his day's labors would find rest. He crossed the workshop threshold, feeling the warmth of the gas lamp overhead wrap around him like a shawl. He set his satchel down on the wooden counter, its worn leather flaps still bearing flecks of soot and oil. He unhooked the ladder from the wall, its rungs smoothed from years of frequent use, and leaned it in its usual corner. Every item returned to its proper place was a small testament to order amid the night's advancing calm. Before he began his nightly ritual of cleaning and journaling, he took a moment to cast one last glance out of the open doorway. The village, his village, lay before him under the protective guise of countless tiny flames. They stretched in neat ribbons up every street, across the bridge spanning the river, and even to the faint outline of the windmill beyond the fields. In each lamp's soft glow, he saw reflections of children's slumbering faces, merchants tending final accounts, and elders telling stories by the hearth. The lamps did more than keep darkness at bay, they wove together the lives of every soul in town, illuminating both pathway and purpose. A soft sigh escaped him as he turned back inside. Tomorrow would call for fresh oil, careful inspections, and perhaps the repair of that one lamp with the cracked globe near the smithy's forge. But for now, as the distant church bell faded into a hushed echo, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He touched his fingers to the polished brass of a spare nozzle on the bench, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingertips, and gave thanks for another day's work well done. Stepping fully inside, he closed the door behind him with a gentle click. The soles of his boots sounded muted against the earthen floor as he crossed to the central work table. There, in the lantern's glow, he would begin the slow, familiar tasks of tool cleaning and ledger writing, small midnight labors that bookend his craft, just as the lamps bookend the village's days. But for now, he simply inhaled the mingled scents of oil, wood, and faint smoke, and allowed himself one final, contented breath before he set to work. In the stillness of the lamp shop, surrounded by the golden light he had tended and nurtured all day long, the lamplighter felt a profound kinship with each gentle flame. And as he turned toward his workbench, a soft resolve took root. Tomorrow, as always, he would rise before dawn to kindle the town's next chapter, spark by spark, lamp by lamp. He sets down the last glowing lantern upon a low bench and lets out a breath that has been held nearly all evening. Outside the narrow workshop window, the village lamps sway softly, their light pooling on worn cobblestones. Inside, oil-scented air mingles with the faint metallic tang of brass, and the hush that follows his final round settles in. It is here, at this quiet hour, that he must attend to his tools and record the tapestry of the day in careful script. First, he lifts a coarse linen rag and brushes at the residue clinging to a brass nozzle. Under the effulgence of a small glass lamp on his bench, the soot flakes lose their grip, falling like tiny black petals into a shallow tin tray. He leans forward, the single candle behind him casting his long shadow against the cold stone wall. Each pass of cloth over metal reveals the true sheen of polished brass beneath years of smoke. He marvels for a moment at how the brightest shine can lie buried under the dullest tarnish, just as the day's small triumphs are hidden by the many tedious tasks. With meticulous care, he unscrews the nozzle from its holder and sets it aside. He reaches for a small bottle of turpentine, uncorks it, and tilts the neck to depress a single drop onto the rag. The pungent scent of the solvent pierces the quieter aroma of oil, sharpening his senses. He works the rag in gentle circles, coaxing away the grime that no dry cloth could shift. Then he returns the nozzle to its place, tightening the threads until the fit is snug and secure. Beside the nozzle, an oil can stands plump and rounded, its sides flecked with the day's drips. He lifts it into the hollow of one arm, steadying it as he wipes its surface with deliberate strokes. His fingers circle each curve, seeking out smears and smudges until the metal gleams once more. He tests the spout, opening and closing the small valve with nimble movement, listening for the smooth click that assures him the mechanism remains unfettered. Even these simplest implements, so easily taken for granted at dawn, must receive his regard before he can rest. One by one, he attends to every tool, the slender spanner he used to adjust gas joints in the outer lanes, the little shears he wielded earlier to trim charred wicks, the corking awl that sealed small glass flasks of oil. Each takes its turn beneath his rag, each finds its place upon the bench's rough-hewn boards. He arranges them in order of use, from left to right, a silent litany of metal and wood against the firelight. He pauses and turns to a row of glass vials still half full of golden oil. Their stoppers are damp with residue from refilling earlier that afternoon. Gently, he lifts each and wipes around the neck where oil tends to congeal in a sticky ring. Once clean, he returns them to a wooden crate reserved for tomorrow's journey. Even the humble flasks deserve an orderly resting place, for he has learned by experience that chaos in one's provisions can spell disaster once darkness falls and time is of the essence. At length, his tools restored to order, he crosses the small workshop to a narrow desk of aged oak. The surface bears the scars of many evenings, ink blots, faint burnished circles where pots of oil once stood, small gouges from too keen pen points. He lights a fresh candle, prompting a sudden leap of warmth and brightness that banishes the lingering corners of shadow. The wick crackles, sending minuscule sparks alighting the stone hearth, and he draws his chair close. From a shallow drawer he withdraws his bound ledger, its leather cover soft and worn. He unties the leather strap, releasing the stiff resistance of years, and opens to the first blank page after last night's account. The fine paper rustles, crisp beneath his fingertips. He uncorks an inkwell, dipping the quill until it swims with dark fluid. With the practiced slant of his hand, he begins to write. The heading takes shape in neat, looping letters. July 14, 18. Evening entry. Each stroke is steady, no hurried scrawl betrays fatigue. Below, he records the time he finished lighting the lamp at the old stone bridge, noting a slight sputter in the flame's center. He recounts the stout gust of wind that threatened to snuff the lantern at the marketplace, how he shielded the wick with his coat sleeve while tightening a loose collar. He describes the merchant's grateful nod, the hurried chatter of a passing coach, and the hush that followed when the final lamp in the outer district began to burn brightly against the dark hedgerows. As the words flow, he lingers over details, for memory serves only when coaxed gently. He mentions the tiny tear in the globe he patched with a bit of tar, and how a spider's web inside nearly escaped his notice. He reflects on the hush of the river at dawn and the way the water caught the first lantern like a molten vein. Each entry is more than a record, it is a remembrance of light, of flame against shadow, of warmth against chill, of day's labor brought to bright conclusion. Next to his written reflections, he slides a blank page forward and reaches for a stub of charcoal. On the edge of the ledger, he sketches a rough diagram of the troublesome lamp fitting at the village gate. The drawing is simple, just a circle for the globe, lines for the mounting arms, a small cross where the gas pipe threads in. He annotates each part in faint script: joint loose, spare wrought iron clamp needed, renew seal before next rain. This illustration will guide him in tomorrow's repair, ensuring he brings the proper materials at first light. He leans back, the candlelight quivering across the parchment. He reviews the day's minutiae, each opening and closing of a gas valve, every trim of a curled wick, the subtle shift in hue as the flame burned brighter or dimmer. Each small event now lies captured in ink, safe from the night's oblivion. A soft knock at the shuttered window draws his gaze. The hush beyond is absolute save for the distant toll of the church bell marking the hour. He gently blots any remaining wet ink with a scrap of blotting paper, pressing carefully to avoid smudging. Then, test by test, he lifts the ledger and thumbs through to ensure no line has bled, no margin left blank of its rightful entry. Satisfied, he settles the quill back into its holder, snaps the inkwell shut, and pushes the candle a little nearer for a last glance around the dim workshop. His tools rest at the ready, the bench tidy, the ledger closed and secured with its strap. One final ritual remains. He stands and steps to the hearth, where the candle sputters in its holder. Bringing his cupped hands near, he pauses as the flame licks the air, a tiny, steadfast sentinel against the dark. He exhales in a sustained breath, extinguishing the flame until only a thin wisp of smoke curls upward. The room dims abruptly, the warm glow receding into the gloom. In that sudden stillness, he hears the quiet more keenly, the soft tick of a wooden clock in the corner, the gentle sigh of a breeze beyond the door, the faint murmur of gas within the lampposts lining the street. This silence is his companion now, a reward earned through day-long toil. He closes his eyes, breathing deeply of the oil-scented air, feeling the slow pulse of the village beyond the walls. His journal and tools lie waiting for the dawn, when he will rise again to journey forth beneath pre-dawn skies. But for this night duty is done. He steps back, feeling the cool floor underfoot, and reaches for the latch of the workshop door. The brass handle is cool to the touch. He turns it, pausing once more in the doorway to offer a quiet salute to the lamps he has tended, to the subtle radiance that endures. Then softly he pulls the door closed. The workshop's interior slips into darkness, and the world beyond stands illuminated by the steady glow of gaslight. In the hush that follows, he hears the distant echo of footsteps on stone, the rounded call of an owl overhead, and the steady, patient promise of a new day to come. He stood for a long moment with the slender iron key resting between forefinger and thumb, warm from his palm. The heavy oak door before him, darkened by years of soot and weather, bore deep furrows in its grain. Each fissure and knot told of hands that had shaped it, of countless seasons spent at the street's edge. He inserted the key into the wrought iron lock and felt the mechanism give a soft, firm click. The tumblers shifted inside with a muted, reassuring click. One for each ward, one for each pin. A small plume of milky breath rose from his lips in the chill midnight air as he turned the key a quarter revolution, then another, until the bolt retracted with a faint scrape. He eased the door shut and heard the solid thunk of wood meeting jam. Leaning his shoulder briefly against the door, he exhaled, allowing himself a pause. Around him, the evening whispers of the village drifted like a slow lullaby. The scent of damp earth mingled with the faint tang of leftover lamp oil, a trace memory of all the day's labors. A single lamppost, its glass panels free of sooty smear, shone like a beacon at the corner of Market Lane. He braced one hand against the doorframe and allowed his eyes to wander up and down the street. Each lamp he had tended stood resolute, their gentle flames kindled by his own steady hands, beckoning any late traveler or dream-laden soul with a soft promise of light in the dark. He inhaled deeply. The night air tasted of 1,000 small things. The crisp dew resting on cobblestones, the distant smoke of wood fires, the faint musk of hay in the barnyards beyond the far gate. That aroma, half earth, half oil, was the very essence of his craft. He could sense it clinging to his worn coat, to the wool cap tucked beneath his chin, even in the calluses of his palms that bore the memory of ladders and wicks. For all its subtlety, the night carried these scents like an invisible cloak, wrapping him in the quiet culmination of a day's work well done. Shifting his weight, he stepped back indoors and closed the door behind him. The small lamp shop was nearly deserted of sound, save for the murmur of settling timbers and one last sputter from a waning candle on the workbench. The narrow planks underfoot creaked ever so slightly as he advanced toward the back of the shop, where a rickety stair led upward. Each step rose higher than the last, as though the building itself curved toward the heavens. He placed a gloved hand on the simple railing, a length of roughly hewn pine, and ascended in measured footfalls. His lantern, still clipped at his belt, cast dancing patterns of light upon the low ceiling beams, revealing the broken edges of plaster and the occasional nail head glinting like a distant star. At the top of the stairs, he emerged into a small chamber no larger than a child's closet. The room smelled of woolen blankets folded in a corner, of an unfinished journal awaiting his thoughts, and of a single tallow candle whose wick had burned low before tonight's labors. A narrow window faced east, showing only shifting shadows and a sliver of sky that, in a few hours, would blush with dawn. He set down his oil canister with a soft clink on the edge of a rough-hewn shelf, and his tools, brass nozzles, spare wicks, slender bottles of naphtha, found their places in neat rows. Everything returned to order, as though he had never stirred from its spot. Turning toward a simple bed in the corner, he removed his cap and hung it on a wooden peg, then peeled off his boots one after the other, exposing stockings gray with soot. The straw mattress sighed at his weight as he lowered himself, careful not to disturb the folded quilt at the foot of the bed. He drew aside the patchwork coverlet, stitched by his mother long ago, and let the woolen blanket fall over his legs. The air here was still, warm from the tiny oil lamp he had left burning on a shelf, its glow flickering against rough plaster walls. He reached across the bed to snuff the lamp's wick with his fingertips, watching the flame curl and die without a sound. Lying supine, he brought one hand to his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his own breathing. His other hand drifted over the small journal propped on his heart, recalling the ledger entries made only an hour ago. 26 lamps lit in the outer ring, 3 minor repairs, no broken glass, 1 stubborn spider web removed from beneath a town square lantern. Those neat lines of ink spoke of order, of measured progress. Yet, as his eyes grew heavy, he allowed his mind to wander beyond the ledger's tidy columns, recalling instead the soft hiss of gas as it met his trimmed wick, the hush that fell over rooftops when darkness surrendered to illumination. In the dim half-light of the attic, his eyelids fluttered as if stirred by a faint breeze. Before sleep claimed him fully, he traced in thought the path he would walk again at first light, stepping into pre-dawn mist, lantern in hand, to begin anew. The thought was neither burdensome nor unwelcome. It felt more like the closing of one long gentle circuit before the next. Outside, a church bell tolled the hour. Its distant peal resonated through the quiet night, joining with the muted glow of his handiwork to compose a final lullaby. His breathing slowed, lungs filling and emptying with the cool hush of night. In those last moments of wakefulness, he pictured the lamps he had lit, each one a droplet of warmth and guidance in the darkness. He saw their faces reflected in puddles on glistening stones, traced their faint circles of radiance onto the walls of sleeping houses, and felt a serene satisfaction settle like a soft blanket around his shoulders. Then, with a final, contented sigh, he let his thoughts dissolve into dreams of gentle flames dancing on slender wicks, the world rendered safe and still by his steady hand. Somewhere beyond the narrow walls of his attic room, the village slumbered under his watchful vigil. The lamps he had tended burned on, faithful guardians of midnight's hush. And as sleep finally claimed him, the lamplighter drifted into that timeless realm where flickering light and shadow merged, ready to awaken at dawn's first whisper and begin again. The night held its breath around him, and in the soft dark, he dreamed of fire, calm, radiant, and ever inviting.